program is brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with the Eau Claire Area School Board.
Hey, we're going to call this to order. Tonight's meeting is a blended model meeting, open both in person and with a little bit of technical wizardry, remote participation, and live viewing. Information to join remotely can be found at ecasd.us/stream. This meeting is also being recorded. Past school board meetings can be viewed on demand at valleymediaworks.org and in board docs. More information about this and other board items can be found at ecasd.us under the Board of Education tab. Maida, will you confirm that we're in compliance with open meeting laws?
Yes.
Thank you. If you would do a roll call to verify quorum. Board members, remember to speak up a little bit tonight.
Commissioner Nordin.
Here.
Commissioner Zur.
Here.
Commissioner Bika.
Here.
Commissioner Clements.
Here.
Commissioner Harder.
Here.
Commissioner Johnson.
Here.
Commissioner Lyons.
Here. Those who are willing and able, please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll now move to the adoption of tonight's agenda. I would hear a motion to adopt the agenda. So moved. Moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion carries. Next up, we have our recognitions. I'll turn it over to Superintendent Johnson for 2 important recognitions.
Good evening, Chair Nordin and guests and executive team. We've got 2 of them tonight. Last month, DeLong Middle School was able to hold the first in-person band concert in well over a year. The concert was featuring incoming 6th graders. Students and families were socially distanced, and the student performers did a wonderful job. Principal Michelle Weiberg said she's really looking forward to watching these musicians grow over future years at DeLong. Thank you to Mr. Dennis Luganbill, DeLong Band Director, for making this concert possible and for helping these incoming students kick off their middle school years with a fun and positive experience. Thank you, Dennis. Dennis, are you here this evening? Okay. Our second recognition this evening, ECASD and EDU staff congratulate Mr. Seth Krybik for receiving the 2021 Wisconsin Substitute of the Year Award. Seth was nominated by several teachers and administrators in our district. In the documents to recognize Seth, it was mentioned he's adored by students and staff, requested specifically by the special ed department. He frequently subs at both high schools, and the 2 buildings argue about who gets to keep him, as he is a great asset. Other words to describe him include flexible, personable, and positive. This is his first year as a substitute teacher. He's certified in German and English as a second language. When he was 19 years old, he moved to Austria for a semester of study abroad, but ended up staying 3 years. There, he discovered his love for German and decided to become a teacher. When schools went virtual in 2020, Seth came back to the U.S. to finish his master's in teaching English to speakers of other languages and substitute taught. And this has also allowed him to focus on his studies. He enjoys building relationships with the students and staff of the Eau Claire Area School District. Thank you for your excellent work, Seth, and congrats on your well-deserved honor. Seth, are you here this evening? I know it's kind of tough for all visitors tonight. We usually have a picture where we get up front. I get to take a picture with Seth. We're getting the, so if you can kind of get through, I'll try to get through too. We'll probably do it. Yep, right there. Yep, sounds good. We'll take our picture.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for your work.
Yes. Awesome.
Kind of a weird one with the mask, but
Absolutely.
Next, we move on to what I know many of you are here for tonight, and that is our public forum. We're going to need your cooperation tonight to allow everyone to speak. We do have 18 speakers, and normally we provide 30 minutes for public comment. We'd like to hear from all of you. And the way that we can do that is by each of us respecting everyone that's here. You are welcome. We know that this is an emotional issue, and we know that we have speakers on both sides of the mask issue tonight. The board is here to listen. We expect that everyone will listen appropriately. When you approach the podium to speak, you'll have 4 minutes. It will be on the screen there. I hate to be the one who's empowered to interrupt. If you go over your 4 minutes, I will interrupt and stop you because we need to keep moving and make sure that everybody has the opportunity to speak. When people are speaking, please do not interrupt them. Do not shout out for or against what speakers are speaking for. Obviously, clapping is appropriate at the end of a speaker. That's fine. But what we're looking for is if someone is saying something that you don't agree with, please just listen respectfully. We're all here to listen to one another. We don't want this meeting to devolve into things that we've seen on social media or in the news. Eau Claire can be a place where we can disagree even vigorously, but still have the chance to speak to each other in a respectful way. That will go for the remainder of the meeting as well, but certainly the time that we're going to hear about masks is during this public forum. So we welcome you to speak tonight. We do have 18 speakers. I will call them in order. I apologize if I miss your name. When you arrive at the podium, you don't have to do anything in terms of turning on the microphone. We have an overhead mic that will pick you up. We would like to ask you please to state your name and address for our record to start, and then you'll have the remainder of your 4 minutes. In addition, I'll just read the actual public forum statement so that I don't have to think about what parts I covered and not. So I'm sorry. Public forum, each meeting will provide a 30-minute time period in which citizens may address the board to express viewpoints or concerns on agenda or non-agenda items. The 30-minute period may be extended at the discretion of the board president, so long as we are respectful and not interrupting another. I intend to go through all 18 speakers. So help me to do that, and we will have a wonderful meeting, even if we won't end up probably at a decision that everybody in the room is going to agree with. Each citizen will be allowed up to 4 minutes to address the board, providing they have additional or new information that has not been previously shared at the meeting. That's something we would ask you to consider just for everyone's time. If your points have already been made by a previous speaker, consider saying, I just want to reiterate what so-and-so said. That's fine too. The school board will not hear personal complaints of school personnel, nor any person connected with the school system in a public forum. Thank you for listening to my spiel. We would now like to begin listening to yours and what you have to share with us. Our first speaker tonight is Lynn Dankey. Again, I'll just remind you, please name and address to start, and then whatever you have to share.
Hello, my name is Lynn Dankey, 3844 North Shore Drive, Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Some of you may be here tonight to support what this district wants to do, and I support your decision to be supportive of that. Those of us who do not agree with what this district is proposing ask for the same respect. I am here tonight to be a voice for our children. Our children depend on their parents and families to make the health, education, physical, emotional, social, moral, and all other decisions for them. They do not depend on the adults on this board. You don't know them, and you have no legal custody of them at the end of the day for their well-being. Children are the least impacted by this virus, and yet you are making decisions as if they are the most impacted. We are frustrated because we feel strongly that you are not only overstepping your authority in our children's lives, but you are also dismissive of our research and our input in making decisions. Members of the board, I would ask you, how did we arrive at the place where pre-written responses are sent to the public when we email you? Where is the win-win in this situation? Where is the option to seek first to understand and then be understood? When will you consider our research? Because we have all researched. And my final question, I'm asking you to put yourself in our shoes. If you wanted to wear a mask and you were told that we decided you didn't need it, it was unhealthy, you weren't allowed to, you would be upset too, because we would be taking away your freedom of choice. And we are asking you to respect our freedom of choice. Some of us are not able to wear masks. Some of us, it causes a trauma response. Some of the children cannot breathe. The children cannot recognize their teachers' faces. They cannot recognize the social cues that come from the faces. We are asking you to recognize choice. We are optional masks. That's what I'm standing for. That's what I'm representing. Each family, each student, each teacher, each employee should be allowed to make the choice that works for that individual. Every health decision should be left to the individual or their family, not this board. Respectfully, we are asking you to reinstate your mask optional decision that you had prior to last Thursday. These are our children. They're our children that are looking to us to provide for them, to protect them, and to make the best possible education choice to them. They are our children, and they're depending on us to make their health decisions. You guys are not signing their health forms. We are. It's our choice. We are responsible for our children. The definition of justice is the power as appointed by law, honor, or standards to support fair treatment and the reward. It is not justice to use your power to make health decisions for people you do not have legal custody over. I end by quoting Martin Luther King Jr. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Thank you.
Amen.
Our next speaker is virtual, and that is Mary Conti.
Thank you, Superintendent Johnson and members of the school board and our community. I'm a small business owner here in Eau Claire. I'm also the solo parent to an 11-year-old boy who is my whole world. I'm also one of 158 parents locally who to date have signed a petition in favor of masks for all school buildings, which are public property, and all persons who are able to wear them, of course, with exceptions for those who physically are not able to. As others of those parents are also present in this meeting, I will keep my remarks brief. During the past weekend, Reuters news agency reported that just over 1,900 children are hospitalized across the United States with complications from COVID-19. In response to this growing number, Sally Goza, the former president of the American Academy of Pediatrics, stated, "This is not last year's COVID, and our children are the ones that are going to be affected by it the most." And we are increasingly seeing alarming numbers coming from other states that are ahead of the COVID curve, including a number of children who are on ventilators. It's also very important to me to express my deep gratitude today to Superintendent Johnson and the school board members. I sincerely thank you for consulting with local and regional public health experts and education officials, and for your careful review of COVID-19 case numbers, trends, and transmission, and making an informed decision based on the data that do require masks for all people to wear in grades K through 8, where our children who are not allowed to be vaccinated are going to be put in situations of increasing COVID transmission levels. My son is too young to be protected by a vaccine, so this minor layer, just a simple cloth, of protection of masking is a critical public health tool to reduce the risk of transmission of COVID-19 in spite of this more transmissible Delta variant. As all children, staff, and teachers who are able to will wear masks when warranted by the COVID-19 transmission levels in the data, this will also reduce inequitable norms and potential bullying in classrooms between children who are doing different things. It also sends a clear message to any child in our district who has lost a loved one due to COVID-19 that their school community understands their loss and is using all of the tools at its disposal to mitigate the risks of further illness or death. I'm proud to live and work in a community where my health department and school district leaders make decisions based on evidence to mitigate those risks. I thank you for listening to my opinion, but I also frankly believe that in public health, it is the public health epidemiologists and doctors who need to speak to this issue, and that the issue needs to be resolved by looking clearly at the data. Thank you all for your leadership. This concludes my remarks. Over.
Thank you. Next is April Duval.
Good evening. My name is April Duval, 5316C Prill Road. I am a proud parent of an 8th grader who has been attending South Middle School. The main concern during this pandemic, and really it should be all the time, is keeping people healthy. The approach by the health department and our government officials has been social distancing, masking, hand washing, and now vaccination. Unfortunately, we are forgetting the most important part of being and staying healthy. We stay healthy by having a strong immune system. How do we build that strong immune system? By letting it do its job. It's meant to do. It's meant to defend us against germs and microorganisms. Yes, our immune system is there to protect against disease, to fight it. Viruses mutate, and as they mutate, they get weaker. This is a good thing. We should not fear these new variants. We all have the best defense mechanisms in place, our immune system. So what do we do to boost this immune system? We focus on the foods we eat. We eat more vegetables. We drink more water. We have less sugar. We eat less processed foods. So where are those mandates? Where are those strong-armed guidance decisions telling people to eat a rainbow of colors of vegetables every day? Where are the signs on the storefront doors guiding people to health by saying, up your veggie intake today? I ask you, have you boosted your immune system today? How many servings of vegetables did you have today? Why isn't that being mandated and guided for our health and well-being? What else boosts our immune system? Activity and movement. Where's the suggestion to increase our activity? Where are the commercials and ads and signs asking if you've had your 60 minutes of activity today? Where is the push to help your neighbor, help your community, boost your immune system today, eat your vegetables, get active? Why only masks and vaccination? We need to be doing the best that we can for our children's overall health. This includes mental, emotional, and social health. Let our immune systems fight this battle. Let parents choose what is best for their children's health. Wearing a dirty mask over the face for the entire school day is not helping our child's physical, social, emotional, or mental health. Mask choice should be supported moving forward. If masking is not optional for the upcoming school year, we will be open enrolling my daughter to an area school district that is supporting mask choice. My daughter will join my son in being open enrolled to this district. At the end of last summer, my son and I had a huge decision to make about his junior year of school. He was signed up for several of the technology education classes in his studies at Eau Claire Memorial. He plans to pursue a career in that area, and these skills are critical for his future. When the decision was made last school year to be 2 days in person and 3 days virtual, we knew that this was not going to be the best way for him to study welding, automotive, and construction, hands-on skills. Then we found out that the vocational classes would only be virtual, and we knew we had to do something. So I started exploring area districts that would be in person all 5 days, specifically ones with those strong tech ed programs. I have to say that this was the best decision we made for my son's education. He was able to personally take 5-day in-person programming with those technology education classes and has had wonderful opportunities that are building his career readiness. If masking is not made an option tonight, we face this decision in our daughter's schooling. We will look at pulling her from this district and she will join her brother in the district that listens to parents' voices. They've made masks an option. They let parents decide what is best for their child's health. We have the best health mechanism in place to fight illness. Wearing a germ-filled mask is not one of them. I hope that you're hearing us tonight and that you make masking optional. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Larry Jankowski. Thank you, Ms. Duvall, for hitting exactly 4 minutes. I do not want to interrupt anybody tonight when that thing goes red. So thank you so much.
I may need some help with the timer. I'm Larry Jankowski. A couple of quick things. I'll make it this fairly quick. I deal with facts. I'm an IT guy, as I mentioned earlier. I work with major biomedical, biotechnical companies. I worked with organizations that actually do tests kits that are doing entire states and are doing England as well. Whoever wrote this letter, Mr. Johnson, did this letter to staff and families. If I wrote something like this, I'd have been fired. There is no data.
So I appreciate what you're saying, and I'm sorry to interrupt you right now, but we do not hear specific complaints directed towards specific staff of the school district, including Superintendent Johnson. So directors, I understand. I'm just letting you know, and we will enforce those rules. Thank you.
1 point. They claim there's a noticeable increase in COVID-19 cases in Eau Claire. There are no numbers. Further, CDC determined Eau Claire County's community transmission is currently high. No numbers, no facts, no data. Let's see, we'll be doing this until community transmission rates are low based on whatever they are at that time. There are no numbers. We don't know when it's done. I'll leave that alone. Let's go to the immune system. Anybody have kids? My daughters, when they're between 3 months and maybe 12 months, they're crawling on the floor. I used to tease my neighbors that I didn't need a vacuum cleaner. They ate everything on the floor. Seriously. They've got the best immune system on the planet. Now, going back to facts. CDC and media says 50% of Americans are vaxxed. Data shows it's only 32%. These are facts. This is data. This is coming out of the Kaiser Family Foundation. You have data from 2,400 countries reported as of May 11th. An average is 32% are vaccinated. That's real data. These are real numbers. This isn't made up something from the internet. That's, let's see. And there's an incredible amount of doses of vaccine. I should clarify that. The word vaccine means like a cure, like the one we had for polio. What we have today is technically not a vaccine. It's a flu shot. It has not been certified by the FDA. It's still classified as an experimental drug. You cannot force people to take an experimental drug. I've worked with people in that work with experimental drugs at a little school called Stanford University in cancer and cardiology. People have to sign permission slips, about 15 pages, to be accepted into a program that there's no guarantee it's going to work. Those are true experimental drugs. These are not. These technically are useless. Let's get back to the masking bit. Masks routinely don't work. Here's a test. When you're out walking around, can you smell your partner's perfume? Can you smell your husband's cologne? Can you smell smoke particles from the wildfires or your campfire? Those are larger than corona. The masks you're wearing are useless. To be clear, and again, you guys like to use CDC as a as your master source. CDC recently updated provisional deaths as of August 26th. Only 6% of the 161 deaths recorded actually died of COVID. The other 94% died with COVID, 2 or 3 other serious comorbidities, advanced age 74 and up. They're recently wrong again when they overcounted Florida's COVID cases.
Mr. Jankowski, I'm sorry, I gave you a few extra seconds based on my previous one, but you are out of time. Our next speaker is Maggie Venable. And if I could just remind everybody your name and address, please, for the record when you begin speaking. I remember you saying that last time that you were here. I made sure I announced it right before to help you out.
I brought you guys a handout this time. Aren't you excited?
You can just hand them to commissioners.
All right, Maggie Venable, 3409 Briarcrest Drive. Good thing I got that in there today, this time. Good evening, Superintendent Johnson and school board members. Last time I was in front of you, I spoke on the line between parental rights and education being drastically blurred, and it's incredibly disappointed that here we are again. I decided to forego discussing science because we've done that now for 12 months. We have been called misinformed. And no matter really what your opinion is about a mask, you can find science to support your opinion because, like politicians, unfortunately, science can be bought. What I handed each of you is pictures of the attendance at local events over the summer. It was great to have these events again, and it was fantastic to see very little increase in case numbers, but our kids didn't ask for these events to happen. And now they will be the ones suffering the consequences of them. Sounds like summer concert series, attendance 1,500 people per week. Food Truck Friday, attendance 750 people per week. Food Championship, attendance 1,000 people per week. Memorial Day Parade, attendance 1,000 people. 33 home express games, attendance 1,500 people each. Carson Goes Country, attendance 2,500 people. Rockin' on the River, attendance 150 people each week. Country Jam, attendance 75,000 people. Ashley for the Arts, attendance 45,000 people. Northern Wisconsin State Fair, attendance more than 100,000 people. And although not in our area, let's not forget about the Milwaukee Bucks celebration with over 100,000 people, 160,000 people packed into the Deer District, and State Fair just closing with the attendance of 1,130,572 people. Some of these events listed above were approved by our local city officials. Another one taking place this weekend. And all of those things had one thing in common. Masks were optional. And thankfully, I have not heard of one outbreak reported. After looking at these pictures and hearing these numbers, I would ask you all to step back and evaluate the logic when saying masks are mandatory for school. You trying to get people to believe that our children are more at risk inside a sanitized school, sitting at a desk by themselves, than 25,000 people packed together, screaming and dancing and cheering for a music concert. Over the past 18 months, we have watched the so-called national thought leaders in the COVID battle alternate the guidelines over and over and over. Our community deserves better than that. Our community deserves to start moving forward. I respectfully ask you to go back to your original decision of masks optional for our school district, which is currently the same decision for every district within 65 miles of us. Other districts surveyed the parents. Why didn't the Eau Claire Area School District do this? My healthcare decisions made with my family physician may be different from yours and yours and yours and yours. I wouldn't ask anyone else to follow my physician's advice because we all have our own individual healthcare plans drawn up with our own individual physicians. One blanket decision does not work for every student and staff member in the Eau Claire Area School District. Please put the power back in the hands of the parents and let them be the medical advocates for their children. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Darcy Teagues.
The gal in the teal shirt about being healthy, eat your fruits and vegetables. Great. I love that. Board members, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Darcy Teagues, 15932 Cornell, Wisconsin. My husband and 4 school-age children reside in the Cadott School District. The past school year, we chose to part from the public school system to teach at home because it's against our beliefs to cover our face and believe it causes severe health risk. In February, our oldest boy went back to junior high, public junior high, but with that brought consequences to complying. From mask wearing, the headaches, anxiety began, ultimately resulting in issues from peers and faculty. 2 weeks before the end of the school year, my son decided to stand up for his constitutional rights and wouldn't wear a mask at school. He said, "Mom, I'm not wearing this rag no more." He was separated from his class and confined to the office. This is discrimination. It took a lot of courage to do that, and I'm proud of my son. Do you have that kind of courage? Courage to say yes to options. The guilt it may bring to a parent is a great burden. For me, it was, does he have a mask? Do I wash it enough? Do I wash it properly? How is this affecting his education? As I washed his mask in disgust of the snot and bacteria, I thought, where is the right in this? It saddens my heart that the school boards have been put in an unfortunate position that was never yours to have. Let parents do you a favor and relieve you of this burden. The taxpayers of this community, I'm sure, are thankful that you accepted a position to take an oath to represent them. But it's hard to appreciate the mismanagement and unwillingness to entertain the idea that parents are incapable of making medical, emotional, physical, mental, educational, and spiritual decisions for our kids. Are we really that incompetent of knowing what's best? The longer you prolong forced masks, you are slowly stripping away our dignity. The fact that we are capable to give birth and leave the hospital with our first baby with no experience, no manual or education, and everyone says, oh, you'll be fine. And then 5 years later, we enroll them in a school system and suddenly our decision-making isn't good enough. Do you see the hypocrisy in this? The government wants us to be able, just not able enough. My point is, parenthood is different for everyone. Masking decisions are different for everyone. You can review the data all day long, but COVID is here, and parents have the right to choose how they will live with it. As parents, we do not need the CDC or an epidemiologist to tell us what's best. We don't need your permission to make decisions for our children. We are the only qualified person to do that. Some parents may choose to mask, others may not. But whatever you choose, parents, do what's best for your child. Mask should be optional. Thank you.
Next up, we have Mike Pers. Sorry, next up, we have Mike Pers.
Good evening, everyone. You hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Mike Pers. I'm on the south side of Eau Claire, 2118 Skeels Avenue. I reside there. I've been a resident of Eau Claire since 1989. I reside there with my wife and my 2 children, who are 5 and 4. Our children right now are open enrolled in Chippewa Falls School District this year. Our daughter, who is 5, will be attending kindergarten, and our son, who is 4, will be attending 4K. You're probably asking yourselves why we made this decision. Initially, it was because our daycare provider was in Chippewa Falls and we didn't want to find additional daycare for before and after school. Since COVID has become part of our society, the decisions made by the board in Eau Claire have made us happy with our decision to open enroll our children in Chippewa Falls for two main reasons. First, they never chose the confusing online hybrid learning model that the Eau Claire School District used last year. Our daughter attended 4K in person. As a parent of young children, I can't imagine how to successfully navigate virtual learning for kindergarten-age children. They're just trying to figure out what school is all about, and I feel they learn better from personal interaction rather than learning from a screen. This past spring, Chippewa Falls School District made the decision that students would be attending classes in person 5 days per week for the upcoming school year. And Eau Claire School District hadn't made the decision yet. And we needed to make the decision for our children, so we again open enrolled them in Chippewa Falls. Second reason they're enrolled there, Chippewa Falls School District is making masks optional for our children, and Eau Claire has decided to require them for schools. We, as our family, are big proponents of freedom of choice. Our country was founded on freedom of choice, and we stand with those businesses, churches, and other entities that allow freedoms of choice as granted in our Constitution. Parents are the ones that are best equipped to make that decision, what is best for our children and families. Mandates forcing compliance go against that very definition of freedom. While I do not feel the need to send my children to school in a mask, I also respect other parents' decision that may feel differently. If they feel it's best choice for their family, then by all means, make that decision. I respect both sides of the fence. That is the great thing about our country, freedom of choice. I understand the reason for the mask requirements initially was to reduce transmission of COVID. However, a little research this morning on the Eau Claire County website indicates that as the caseload for Eau Claire County as a whole, we have 28 cases averaging per day. Of those cases, 10.5% of them are school-age children, ages 4 through 17. So my rough math says there are an average of 3 school-age children in the entire Eau Claire County per day that are COVID positive. In a county with a population of over 105,000 people, that number doesn't make sense to me to make it mandatory for all students. It's a very small risk. Having a child's face covered does not allow them to breathe freely, does not allow them to see the facial interaction of others, which I feel is a big part of communication and learning, especially at a young age that my children are. I feel the risks of contracting COVID are minuscule compared to the social repercussions of keeping students masked and apart from each other. Kids need to be with their friends and need to learn how to formulate new friendships and communicate at a young age, verbally and non-verbally. Keeping children masked to mitigate a very small risk does not make sense. And if my child is sick for whatever reason, yes, they will be staying home so they can get better without making others ill. In closing, I ask that the school board reconsider their decision and allow parents and children to make the decision what is best for their family and allowing for freedom of choice and personal liberty for all Americans in our school district. We hope to be able to enroll our children in Eau Claire School District at some point in the future. But unfortunately, we've decided they're going to stay in Chippewa Falls until the parents and families here are allowed freedom of choice. Moving out of the district or out of state might have to be an option for us in the future if those freedoms are going to be taken away from us. We just want to thank you for your time this evening and attention.
Next speaker is Tricia Lenz.
My name is Tricia Lenz. I live at 403 Ravenswood Court, Altoona, Wisconsin. I grew up in the Eau Claire School District and I graduated in 1984 from North High School and 1990 from UW Eau Claire. My adult life has been spent nurturing the development of children. As a mom and a teacher, growing kids from stage to stage in their development has been very rewarding. Presently, I work with special education students as an assistant to kindergarten and first graders in a neighboring district where I live, but Eau Claire will always be considered my home. I love my job. I have the privilege to be a bridge between my students and an often inaccessible school day. Because of limited verbal, emotional, cognitive, and physical abilities, my students need supports to engage with their teachers, peers, and activities. It is the most rewarding job ever. When I get to witness a fearful kindergartner enjoy a school experience or a teacher or a person or a new relationship because of support I was allowed to supply them, it gives me great joy. I lost much of this joy last year because of mandatory masking of kids and staff. The job of a small child is to learn to bond with teachers, make friends, learn to read, play, breathe, run outside. This is hard to impossible to do with a mask on all day long. This job of theirs requires our faces. It required my face, and I didn't give that to them. The students I work with who are non-limited verbal, they would stare at my face looking for a friendly, reassuring smile, tone, in my words. Depriving them of part of this felt so wrong, and I felt lost every day without this tool of connection, like a carpenter without a hammer or a pilot without a plane. Go ahead and keep going with that analogy. I saw shy kids remain shy and become less verbal. I saw verbal kids hindered from socializing and growing that beautiful gift. I saw the natural curiosity of children squelch, replaced with constant messages from really good teachers to mask up and stay apart. I saw excellent teachers. They enforced these non-kid-friendly policies at the expense of academic and social learning, and I knew it broke many of their hearts. We always hear that kids are resilient and can recover. After 1 year, I agree. I think they can. But if we continue to practice this and normalize it, I am so concerned that we will be responsible for stunted child development and increased mental health issues. Also, I did not work with one sick child last year, and that was not always the case before, because parents kept them home. This is an effective health policy, which enables the school to focus on learning and teaching. Optional masks are the humane policy. It's the only unifying policy. Those who want to, please, yes, wear one. Those who don't, they can decline. Physical health is tied to emotional and mental health. Our kids need messages of life and hope right now more than ever. They are young, full of wonder, and they need schools to nurture this, to alleviate fears, not feed them in a daily dose. A brief comment as a parent of 3 children. 2 are adults and 1 is in high school. I am used to balancing risk with growing and learning as a parent. I know safety needs need to be considered, and I also know that my kids needed life experiences to learn and grow. Schools are their main connection to life experiences, especially early learning experiences. We want them to learn to be courageous, to face fear, to become more compassionate through adversity, to have strong character. We know this does not happen without risk. Safety is always to be considered, but it is a terrible.
I'm sorry, Ms. Lenz, that's your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Lori Plackworth.
My name is Lori Plackworth. I live at 2229 Trillium Drive, Eau Claire, Wisconsin. I'm also a school teacher in a private school here in Eau Claire that typically follows the same guidelines that the public school district puts out. Thank you for your time. I've been fervently praying for the outcome of this meeting. After 18 months of researching and debating, it has become clear that both sides can certainly find and apply statistics that would back up their own opinion, and I'm exhausted by that. And therefore, today, I would like us to just focus on what we actually see and use our brains to draw logical conclusions. Number one, excessive mask wearing is actually unhealthy for healthy individuals. It is intuitive to know that we should not inhale what our body is exhaling as waste. In the case of school sports, I have heard students gasping for air and seen them physically struggle for lack of clean oxygen. Many students do not even use clean masks anyway, but rather the same filthy ones day after day. 2, masking cannot be effective given the variation of masks and the conditions in which they are worn. I've seen bandanas open at the bottom, homemade masks made of who knows what kind of material. All of this when even the medical masks are debatably not effective. Students instinctively take them off to sneeze and then don't get their mouths covered in time, spitting all over the place. They would have otherwise caught in their elbow or somewhere. The mask also becomes a disgusting, unremovable handkerchief for students with runny noses. Masks are causing increasing anxiety. One of my students missed 40 days of school last year, and only 10 of those were actually due to COVID isolation, 30 due to anxiety, much of which had to do with masking. There are reports of, number 4, there are reports of astronomical increases in domestic and substance abuse, as well as suicides. 5, my students hated masks. They were desperate for their mask breaks, and last spring when the mandate was finally lifted, only one of my students left it on initially, but by the end of the class, all of them, the first period, all of them were unmasked and quite giddy about it. 6, my own children begged me to be homeschooled last year because of masks. This year, they will be if our school follows a mandate. And my school will also lose a teacher. This, quite honestly, infuriates me as it interferes with my children's social growth and with my family's financial livelihood. Please repeal this order and make masks optional. This virus is not actually at pandemic levels, especially in the pre-K through 8th grade demographic. Therefore, it does not warrant an emergency use order of any sort. If my students did get it, their afflictions ranged from no symptoms to slight cold symptoms. If masks work, it should really not matter if others are wearing them, as long as the wearers are protected. Thank you.
The next speaker is Cynthia Burton. Ms. Plackey-Worth, as a person whose name is almost never pronounced correctly on the first try, it's Nordine, for those of you that want to write a verbal email to me later, I don't know. I apologize for missing your name.
Hi, Cindy Burton, 3242 May Street, Eau Claire. You need to let the parents be the parents. Right now, there are 3 COVID-related medical interventions that are used under emergency use authorization: the PCR tests, the masks, and the COVID vaccines. Do you know the laws governing emergency use authorization? Do you know that means none of these have been approved as safe and effective? There is no data that shows masks are effective in preventing the spread of a virus. At best, they have negligible impact. There is, however, recent because we've never done this before, showing the pathogens growing on the unsterile masks of our children. That data is indicating tremendously increased level of CO2. Is anyone surprised by these findings? And that is just the physical harm. What about the psychological and emotional harm, which is not the same for every child? Do you know about informed consent with regard to emergency use authorization, which includes the right to decline and does not allow for coercion or shaming? Do you understand that people in positions of authority have a higher responsibility to be fully informed about the decisions they are impacting? It is not sufficient to say we are just following what another agency is telling us. The CDC is not at the leading edge of what is happening. They are at the lagging edge. By the time they have data, a lot of harm has already occurred. Our health department is primarily following CDC guidelines
because that's the answer I get every time I ask a question. You, however, could be leading rather than lagging. You cannot know the impacts on each and every child. You cannot know the burden you put on parents if you essentially force them to do something they know is harming their child. And trust me, you do not want that weighing on you every day and every night. Furthermore, would you be willing to be personally liable for that? I have spent hundreds of hours seeking information and truth because all of the conflicting information we have given and listening to people talk in circles with vague information. I seek out highly regarded professionals with a variety of expertise who do not have a conflict of interest, and they provide specific information with data to back it. Have you done that? With all the money floating around out there, there is a lot of conflict of interest in forming our policy. The bottom line is you must let parents be parents. Many parents do not want to pile fear onto their children and suck the joy of life out of their lives. You must let parents decide.
Next speaker is Tina Schwagel.
Hi, I'm Tina Schwagel. I live at 116 East Tyler Avenue in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. I just want to preface this by saying my son also was singled out. He was made to sit in the principal's office when he pulled his mask down too often. He was made to sit there once actually through his lunch break, the one time that he actually wouldn't have had the mask on. It got to where I called him and said that that wasn't going to happen anymore. And if it did, you can call me and I'll come get him. Because my son is not going to be singled out just because he wants to take his mask down. And as far as, I could put him in a different school district, but we live less than 2 miles from South Middle School. I went to South Middle School. That's where my son wants to go. That's where his friends are. That's where he deserves to go. And I shouldn't have to pull him out, try to figure out how to help him make new friends, how to figure out how to get him to school when I work a full-time and an on-call job myself and manage a household. That's not acceptable that I should have to do that when he lives a mile from school. So that was a little off my script here, but I guess I have a little bit of information just to share from a report published by JAMA Pediatrics. It's a journal published by the American Medical Association Journal. It revealed that children who wear face masks experience adverse health effects. Wearing masks increases the amount of carbon dioxide in inhaled air to unhealthy levels. The normal content of carbon dioxide in the air is 400 parts per million, with anything above 2,000 considered unacceptable per the German Federal Environmental Office. The study noted averages of 13 to 14,000 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the air of children wearing masks for only 3 minutes. This is 6 times higher than the 2,000 threshold. Including busing time, kids could have these masks on between 8 and 10 hours a day. Mask breaks, that doesn't cut it, 8 to 10 hours a day. The report also referenced a German survey of 25,000 children where 68% had problems while wearing facial coverings, most of which were the result of the elevated carbon dioxide levels. This was more pronounced in younger children. The authors urged people to consider the science when making decisions about masking. I believe that we have no idea what the developmental and psychological effects of masking is going to be on children. I'm a social worker. I work with people with disabilities. I've been doing this, 20 years or so. There's evidence of this. We all see it. I see it with my own child. Even the chance that we are putting our kids at long-term risk is unacceptable. There can be accommodations like there are for everything in life for people that have differing needs, differing abilities. We can do that. Some children will have very adverse effects of COVID, and that's tragic. It really is. But we cannot use a blanket mandate that affects all of us when we can make accommodations for those individuals. There can be virtual options, homeschooling. People can mask if they want to, they can distance. There is reputable science on both sides of this argument. We all know that. If you look for one side, you'll find it. If you look for the other, you'll find it. You have chosen to follow the science that you believe in. You've not taken into consideration the specific needs, desires, opinions, and the rights of individuals. You speak of equity. This is not equity. Thank you.
Next up is Katie Wilson.
Hi, my name is Katie Wilson. I live at 602 East MacArthur Avenue, and I have an 11-year-old going into South Middle School this fall. And I have a 7-year-old who is at Longfellow, and he's in the dual immersion program for English Spanish. And before I go into my other remarks, I just wanted to say thank you for that program. Last year, I was able to see him read and write Spanish when we were doing virtual learning, and it was incredible. And I really, really appreciate it, you having that program. So the last time I was in this building, I think I was speaking, asking you for that. And I just want to thank you for that. Really appreciate it. I am one of 158 people who signed a petition, and I know there are many others asking for a universal district masking policy this fall. American Academy of Pediatrics and many other organizations, including our local health department, are asking districts to make these choices. And we appreciate you listening to the science. There are many, many parents, grandparents, students, and other community members who support this policy, and also hope that it's extended to above 8th grade for people who cannot get vaccinated for whatever reason, and keep everybody in this community safe. Many of them would like to be here tonight. Many have been in touch with you already, I know, via email and other means. And we're feeling tired and we're feeling very relieved. And I know a lot of them are at home right now doing their other duties, putting kids to bed and so forth. But they are out there. So I appreciate you taking the time to read your email correspondence and whatnot. On time here, we know this is a public health issue. I expect to send my kid to school and have them be safe. I expect you to have proper food handling. I don't ask you to make decisions or have your cooks make decisions just on what they feel is right for that day and what might feel right at home. You have policies that you need to follow for public health. And this is a similar thing. I can't send my child or my children to school and have them be protected with masking. It is most effective when done universally. So I appreciate that. My daughter is entering middle school, and it's really nice to put this issue aside and focus on the other things about her transition to middle school, not whether she's going to be the only one wearing a mask or not. Just a little anecdote. When we showed up for a basketball program with my son, the first day of summer school, it was a Y program but held in South Middle School, and they were abiding by district policies. About 8 out of the 10 kids were masked at the beginning of the program. And by the end, when it was clear that it was a mask optional policy, only about 2 out of the 10 were masked. And so I do think that people will comply and appreciate this policy. And that is the conclusion of my remarks. I was going to say the dual immersion thing at the end, but I said at the beginning. So I just want to thank you so much for your time and energy and attention and care for the health and safety and education of our kids. Thank you so much.
Next up is Chris Hambuck-Boyle.
Hi, my name is Chris Hambach-Boyle. I live at 1822 Crestview Drive in Eau Claire. As a former educator and school board member in the Eau Claire School District, I come tonight to thank Superintendent Johnson and the board for their courage to opt back to using masks for the start of the school year. I am sure that your decision was not taken lightly and that you took all the impactful facts given by the City County Health Department into consideration. Your caring for all students that attend the district is remarkable in these times. Public school children in Wisconsin's public schools should never have been thrown into the fray over masks. We all wear seatbelts in cars, don't smoke inside businesses, and adhere to drinking age laws. All are for the public good, just as wearing a mask is. I know that you think of every single child, all 11,000 of them, when you make decisions. No community member has more say than anyone else because of who they are or what they have. Again, thanks for the massive decision, remembering every one of the 11,000 children in our district, if not your own. This is the miracle of public schools. We serve all, every single child and family that walk through our doors. And thanks to you, everyone safely. And I end with this. I slept pretty well when I was responsible for my own kids and those in my classroom. But no one knows what the responsibility for 11,000 children and 1,500 staff feels like until you do the job. And I want to thank each and every one of you for doing your job.
Our next speaker is Kayla Rick.
Hi, Kayla Rick, 3348 Morgan Avenue. First of all, thank you for making it a priority to hear from everybody who's come in tonight. I think that that's very respectful, knowing that there are two sides of this conversation and everybody's just wanting to be heard. I guess I have a little bit different thing to add from what other people have said. We hear about experts and expertise all the time. And since the beginning of this, all we are looking through is the lens of the health department. I used to work in the Eau Claire School District. I joined the task force for reopening schools and very quickly learned that the role of that task force was not to figure out what we were doing. It was already decided. Everything the CDC had said was best is what was happening, and that task force was figuring out the how. Those people worked tirelessly. I did it for the first couple of months, but I couldn't keep doing it because I knew I was not going to be able to enforce those things on children. So I had to resign. But I keep over and over keep thinking, when is it time for those of us who are experts in children, mental health, how classrooms should actually look, knowing that children need to see faces to develop that part of their brain center that helps them to understand emotions, to be good at communicating, and to understand language. All of these things, why are they being not considered? Everything is being looked at in the perspective of the health department right now. And this is going to be the third school year that will be impacted by those things. What is the timeline? At what point do we say as experts, we need to now consider children and what they need and not have it be a training ground for the health department? It's unfortunate to see that that's where we're still at this point. No one here is asking you to say people cannot wear a mask. We're asking you to give that choice and to say maybe at this point, because enough people who are vulnerable and are older, and those are the people most at risk, they've had the opportunity to receive a vaccine if they wanted to. Children should not continue to be the ones who are taking the brunt of this and not having a school set up for what is best practice for children and for their learning. I've taken my child out of the school. I resigned. We had to find somewhere else that was willing to listen and to compromise. In the school, you talk a lot about equity. I don't understand how it's equitable because we know that equity is not about being equal. It's about every student getting what they need to be successful. Some children need to not have their face covered all day. Most of them, I would think. That other lady just said that when it was a choice, many fewer people wore that. Why would we continue to teach children to be blindly compliant? How is that a character trait we want in our kids? That's not something I want for my child. And I loved my job and I hated that I had to resign. Thank you for your time.
Got a few more speakers. I'm just going to give people a chance to leave. Our next speaker is Justin Hendrickson.
Good evening. As we approach the beginning of Justin Hendrickson, 1324 Katie Court. As we approach the beginning of a new school year, we are seeing significant increase in COVID cases due to the Delta variant. Across the country, there are reports of significant outbreaks amongst students, widespread quarantining, and school districts temporarily closing for teaching. In February, the administration presented and the board approved an instructional model tying mask requirements to community transmission rates and local, state, and national health recommendations. I believe these recommendations and measures are prudent. I thank you for putting in place clear guidelines that place the responsibility where it belongs on our community's response to COVID. It is our collective obligation to take the actions necessary to reduce transmission rates to a level where masks will no longer be necessary. That said, I urge the board and administration to be extremely cautious as the year begins. Despite 51% of Eau Claire residents being vaccinated and an unknown number of residents having immunity after acquiring COVID, our current per capita active case count is higher than it was last year at this time and is rising. We will need to be vigilant in response to our responsibility to keep our students safe during this crisis. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Megan Lanfear.
Hi, my name is Megan Lanfear, 1435 Bend Court. I'm a former teacher and a mother of 4 children, all in the Eau Claire School District. With the exception of my husband, who is diabetic, our family is very healthy. And up until last year, I can count the number of days that my husband and or my children have been out sick for the last 8 years on one hand. With my husband being diabetic, we were very concerned that he would suffer greatly from contracting COVID, so we were careful and took all the precautions. In October of 2020, my husband came down with a head cold. He came home from work, went to bed early, woke up feeling fine, and went to work the next day. 3 days later, I started to feel a head cold. By Wednesday, I was still feeling lingering cold symptoms. So I was COVID tested and it came back positive. By Sunday, my fever had topped out at 105.7 and I was gasping for air. I was admitted to the ICU. I was treated with remdesivir, an antiviral, which is given to treat COVID or viral pneumonia. 5 days after I was admitted, I had a severe life-threatening setback. An x-ray was taken to reveal that my lungs were completely consumed by pneumonia. They had been treating me for viral pneumonia, but I had bacterial pneumonia. After treating me for bacterial pneumonia, I was able to return home. Many of the doctors and nurses came to say goodbye on my release because they did not think I was going to survive. I'm telling you this because, firstly, my husband is a grown man who is borderline obsessive compulsive about washing and sanitizing his hands. He contracted COVID in his workplace through a mask, and all of the people around him were masked. He brought this home to our house. Our children experienced headache, diarrhea, vomiting, and dry cough. All very minor symptoms. I almost died because I breathed in the bacteria that was in my mask. Brand new masks worn for just a few hours can collect parasites and pneumonia-causing bacteria. I'm not only concerned about the toxicity of the mask, the psychological effects of masking, social distancing, and e-learning have been far greater on children than you will ever admit. The past 2 years has been an absolute terrifying hell for many parents, including my husband and I. I've walked downstairs to find ropes hanging from my rafters. Once the ropes had been removed from our home, my child began braiding together Chromebook cords. I had to build a keypad entry bedroom so that my child wouldn't hang himself or hurt himself. My son was such an adoring big brother, the guy everyone wanted as a friend. Tackle football team. He was above average student, and he has turned into an angry, clinically depressed, suicidal recluse that failed every single class last year. When he attended summer school, when the masks were optional, I caught a glimpse of the person he was before this all started. He felt hope, he felt safe, he felt connected to his teachers and classmates. He received the nonverbal reassurance that he needed from his teachers and classmates, which is, by the way, the most fundamental tool we've ever taught him since he was diagnosed with a social emotional development cognitive delay. He finally felt like himself and he saw an end to his seclusion. He begged me to go to school and was really, really disappointed when summer school was done. Our children are suffering greatly. They need to walk into their school and feel welcome and safe, not like they are the poison, not like the air is poison, and not like everyone around them is poisonous. Placing this burden on our children is psychologically detrimental, and many parents are living with the results of your choices. Wearing a mask should be an option. It's a decision that individual families make in consideration of their individual child's needs. Thank you.
Amen.
There you have it.
We'll remind the audience that we do not accept any comments outside of public comment. You're doing a great job. Thank you. And I know it's getting long. Got 2 to go. Our next to last speaker is Joshua Andrew.
Sorry. Let's hit the lap.
Good evening. I'm the Reverend Joshua Andrew at 1912 Webster Avenue. I sent all of you an email this past week with the bulk of my opinions, and I thank those of you who have read that. I would like to read a little bit more, though, tonight from an anecdotal perspective of my own position that I didn't include in the letter. First of all, because of the mask policy as stated on the door, I'm not allowed to be in this building tonight because as an Afghan war veteran who's been disabled because of my military service, I'm not able to wear a mask because of my post-traumatic stress disorder and because of my lungs that have been damaged because of my exposure to the elements in Afghanistan. My children also can't be here tonight, though they are right over there. Because all of my children have special needs and sensory sensitivities that making them wear a mask for even just the shortest amount of time is unbearable for them. Their ability to self-regulate their behavior goes out the door and their energy level spikes. And I don't need to have finished my dissertation in my PhD in education to tell you that Maslow's hierarchy lets us know as educators that that doesn't work. We can't expect our children to learn anything if their sense of safety and their physical well-being isn't attended to. And your mask mandate does just the opposite of that for those who, like my daughters, are unable to accommodate the wearing a mask. Because as far as I've seen so far, in the current policy, allowances aren't made for those kind of people like myself and my children. For this reason, every level of government, from the CDC to the White House, to our state, to our county, to our city, and here today, before I think even our school, recognized that there are certain people who just ought not wear masks because they can't wear a mask safely and effectively. Even if your current policy does allow for this, the reality is to mandate that everyone else wear a mask too, who might not know that they're in these kind of situations like my daughter yet, or it might be something that they're finding out as they go. The science isn't settled. We've heard it here. You've seen it in my email. Yes, the American Pediatric Association has put out something, but the American Medical Association puts out something else. All of us with advanced degrees know that data is conflicting. And data sources can come from multiple areas, multiple facets to view. And it's not incumbent, I would suggest, on the school board to be the ultimate arbiter of what science is ultimately right. It is incumbent on us as parents. Our job as educators is to give parents and students alike information, knowledge, resources, so that in turn they grow up, or we as parents can make informed decisions that are right for our families and our communities. I think a lot of people should wear masks, but I think it should be optional because it's my job as a parent to make the choice for my children so that they can learn effectively. The reality is when we do otherwise, we state as a school board and as a community of educators that we don't trust you. We don't trust parents to make an informed decision. We don't trust students to critically think for themselves of ways to safely wear a mask to protect their fellow students on their own. We tell them that every important decision has to be made by the government over them. And that's just not how we live in this country. We need to make decisions that every life matters, every student matters, including those who can't wear masks, and even those who feel they shouldn't have to. Thank you, and I pray for you to make this very hard decision. Jesus.
Our final speaker tonight is Mark Goings.
Good evening. My name is Mark Goings. I live at E17450 Condi Road, V, Augusta. And tonight I'm speaking on behalf of the Eau Claire Association of Educator Executive Board. And if possible, Maida, I'm hoping at the end that you can show the district's COVID-19 site. One day I want to be able to stand up here and speak to the board without a mask. I want to teach without a mask. I also want students to learn without a mask. And I want COVID to be nothing but a memory. But today is not that day. Our community spread is too high. While each of us has a right to do as we wish at our homes, the school board's job is to do what is best to ensure the safety and optimal learning environment for our community's 11,000 students. As leaders of the district, thank you for making those difficult decisions in these unpredictable and ever-changing times. Thank you for listening to the recommendations of the Health Department, the CDC, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the DPI. All institutions with a long history of advocating for the well-being of our children and our society. I believe that everyone here tonight is hopeful that our students can have a year of in-person learning uninterrupted by quarantines and shifts to virtual instruction. I believe that everyone here is ready for a day when masks are no longer required or even recommended. With that goal in mind, it is time for us to work to make that a reality. The school board is doing their job. Our administration is doing their job. It is time for us as a community to do ours. If you want our schools, our community to get back to normal, please get vaccinated. Help your family.
This is what I'm talking about. You need to let our speakers speak. We've done it all night for people on both sides. And I appreciate the passion here, but let's remain respectful.
Help your family, your neighbors, and your colleagues get vaccinated. And if you have a specific health reason that is not possible, I ask that you commit to getting tested for COVID regularly. Information for both is available on the district's COVID site. Together, we can create a stronger community. And that starts with a healthy one. COVID is not a school district problem, it is a community issue. We won't be able to mask our way out of COVID, but we can vaccinate our way out. And Maida, could you please call up the district's COVID site so people at home know where they can get more information on vaccines?
Yeah, we're good. We don't need that information.
Thank you.
Thank you. That ends our public comment. In just a moment, I am going to ask for a motion for a brief recess so the board can get a break before we continue our thing. We don't generally address the public after public comment. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. We understand that this is a passionate issue, and I appreciate those of you that came to share and the way that up until the very, very end there, we managed to do so in a way that is indicative of the values that I think all of us appreciate about Eau Claire. It's a willingness to listen. It's a willingness to learn from one another. We have to recognize in this decision, we will not make everyone happy, no matter which way a decision goes. But I appreciate that you are here to share with us. You're welcome to stay. I will actually make the motion myself here in just a moment. But as you've seen on our agenda, this is not an issue that the board will be discussing tonight. The policy is in place and the board supports the policy as it is written. We will communicate changes with you as the policy evolves. So thank you all for being here tonight. At this time, I motion to take a 10-minute recess to reconvene at 9:15. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. We are on recess. We will reconvene for the remainder of the agenda at 9:15. The first section that we have is our reports. We'll start with a report from the Budget Development Committee and Commissioner Harder.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm a little caught up unaware. We did meet last week. We discussed the referendum timing, and I believe it's on.
Thank you. Next is our Legislative Liaison, Dr. Johnson.
Members of school boards of the Wisconsin Association of School Boards seeking resolution adoptions begin with local resolutions on various K-12 education-related topics and submitting them to the WASB by September 15th deadline. On August 11th, the Wisconsin Senate Education Committee and the Assembly Education Committee held a joint public hearing on a pair of bills, AB 411 and Senate Bill 411, that purport to address critical race theory in public schools, as well as a pair of bills, AB 488, Senate Bill 463, that aim to address curriculum transparency. On August 6th, Wisconsin State Health Department and the DPI released new COVID-19 guidelines. The recommendation emphasized universal masking and concerns that the Delta variant of the coronavirus is driving a surge in cases of COVID-19, and many school children remain either unvaccinated or unable to be vaccinated. State officials emphasize that masking, social distancing, and other preventive measures will help keep school buildings open and, more importantly, students learning in person. An emergency rule of the Department of Public Instruction that took effect on December 2nd, 2020, to assist school districts with staffing challenges during the pandemic is soon set to expire. The rule established conditions under which a short-term substitute teacher could teach for longer than 45 consecutive days in the same assignment. Separately, the rule also modified the requirements for pre-student teaching and student teaching clinical experiences within educator preparation programs. However, the rule and a school district's ability to make staffing decisions in accordance therewith is set to expire on August 28th. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move on to the superintendent's consent agenda. For both of our consent agendas tonight, the board considers approval of the items with one vote without discussion. If a board member wants to discuss any item, it will be pulled out of the consent agenda and voted on separately. Tonight's superintendent consent agenda includes human resources employment report and payment of all bills in the amount of $9,677,094.02 and net payroll in the amount of $452,832.05 for the period of June 1st, 2021 through June 30th, 2021. I would hear a motion to approve the superintendent's consent agenda.
So moved. Second.
Maida, will you please conduct a roll call vote?
Commissioner Nordin?
Yes.
Commissioner Zer? Yes. Commissioner Bika?
Yes.
Commissioner Clements?
Yes.
Commissioner Harder?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Commissioner Lyons?
Yes. Thank you. We'll move on to the board's consent agenda. The board's consent agenda tonight includes the minutes of board meeting August 2nd, 2021. May I please hear a motion to approve the board's consent agenda?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. We'll now move on to the focus on results section of tonight. The reason that the board is here is to ensure that the students of Eau Claire meet the results demanded by our community. At this time, I will turn it over to Superintendent Johnson and his team for tonight's focus on results.
Thank you, Chair Nordine. I'll start out with, it's been a long time coming for our high school results. We wanted to make sure data was complete. Obviously, early June is the best time to do it, or shortly thereafter. We were very appreciative of our elementary group, our early learning, as well as middle school, and now's the time for high school. I'd like to have Jim Schmidt and Michelle Radke start out for us first. As they compile these results, can provide some background, and then we'll have our two high school principals.
Thanks, Nate. Good evening. Tonight is our fourth effort at focusing on results. Through the board's new governance model, our coherent governance model, we reviewed a comprehensive set of pre-K data at your June 7th meeting, elementary star growth data at our May 7th meeting, and the middle school grade level data at the May 17th meeting. Tonight we'll review the grade data for high schools over the past 3 graded years, which does not include the 2019-20 pandemic year. So grading at each of our 4 levels, just to remind you, at the elementary level, we use standards-based grading. So if you've ever had that experience, you'll see the 1, 2, 3, and 4. At the middle school, we use the ABC grades, S and U as well, for satisfactory, unsatisfactory. Those grades work in buckets. They work independent of one another. So the first grade grade does not impact the second quarter grade, does not impact the third quarter, but they take the average of each bucket, and that's how they get a final term grade. At the high school, the quarter grades are really a checkpoint along the way to a semester grade. So if you see, so you won't see quarter grades as a focus on this. You'll see it's much more about the semester grade. The semester grade has currency. The semester grade is what leads to the GPA and also helps meet graduation requirements. So semester grades are really, there's not a year grade at the high school that we focus on. It's really semester 1 and semester 2. So tonight's presentation, like I said, will focus on those last 3 graded years. Again, you will not see 1920 because if you recall, that was the year that we just went to pass, no pass. And then, so Michelle Radke is going to start us off and walk you through the data. And then you'll hear from Dave Oldenburg, principal from Memorial, and Kurt Mattson from North to talk about the strategies that were involved over the period of time when we were trying to get students across that finish line. So I'll start with Michelle.
Good evening. I am Michelle Radke, the Director of Assessment for the district. And when looking at high school grade marks, the trends found were historically the grade mark A is given the most frequently in all quarters and semesters in our high schools. In 2021, in all quarters and semesters, there was a decrease in the percentage of A's and an increase of F's compared to previous years. Grade mark data for A's, B's, D's, and F's has been consistent historically, except for 2020-21. Grade mark data for C's was consistent for all years. A decrease in the number of F's from semester 1 to semester 2 was observed in 2021. The representation of grade marks from A's to F's increased in percentage for the following subgroups: American Indian, Black, Hispanic, Pacific Isle, 2 or more, males, SPED, and economically disadvantaged. The representation of grade marks from A's to F's decreased in percentage for the following subgroups: white, female, not SPED, and not economically disadvantaged. When reviewing quarter 1 grades over time, it is consistent except for 2021 quarter 1 grades. In 2021, there was a decrease in the number of A's signified by the top line, and B's is signified by the second line, and an increase in the number of F's, which is signified by the blue line on the bottom. There was a decrease of 3.8% of A's and a 4.4% decrease of B's and a 5.5% increase of F's from 2019-20 to 2021. Quarter 2 grades were also consistent until 2021. There was a decrease in A's by 5.1%, a decrease in B's by 2.7% and an increase in Fs by 7.7%. Semester 1 grades were also consistent until 2021. In 2021, there was a decrease of 4.4% of A's, a decrease of 3.7% of B's, and an increase of 6.8% of F's. Quarter 3 grades were consistent, except for 2021, there was an increase of 2.7% for F's. Grades for 2019-20 were not reported in the quarter 4 due to going to a pass, no pass grade marks for this and semester 2. Quarter 4 grade marks were consistent except for A's and B's. There was a decrease of 2.5% each and an increase of 3.9% of our F's. In semester 2, A's were consistent from years past, but there was a decrease of 3.4% in B's and an increase of 2.9% in F's. Now we're going to specifically look at A's from quarter 1 to semester 2. The A's earned in 2021 school year was consistently less in quarters and semesters except for quarter 3. In all years, there was more A's earned in quarter 1 than in semester 2, with a decrease of approximately 11% of A's earned from quarter 1 to semester 2. When looking at the grade mark B's, B's were consistently less in 2021, as signified by the yellow line, than other years. C's were consistent all years, with the percentage of C's increasing from quarter 1 to semester 2 grades. This is approximately a 3% increase in the C's earned from quarter 1 to semester 2 in all years. The percentage of D's earned in 2021, signified by the yellow line, was consistently more in all quarters and semesters except for quarter 3. Historically, the number of D's earned increases from quarter 1 to semester 2. There is approximately a 4% increase consistently from quarter 1 semester 2. Most variation happens between quarter 1 and semester 2 in the percentage of F's earned. F's were consistently more in 2021, as signified by the yellow line, more than any other year. Every year, there was an increase in the percentage of F's earned from quarter 1 to semester 2, except for 2021. In this year, there was a decrease of 2.45% from quarter 1 to semester 2 in the percentages of F's. The next slides will communicate the presentation of populations for each letter grade. When looking at the data, it will communicate the number of A's earned, and X percentage were Asian, Black, White, etc. So it's a representation within each bucket. When disaggregating the data by race, consistently every year, there's a higher representation of white students who get A's compared to the representation of students who get F's. In 2017-18, there was 78.3% white students. In 2018-19, there were 78.4% of white students, and 2021, 77.5% in grades 9 through 12. There is an overrepresentation of white students in our A bucket and our B, and there's an underrepresentation of white students for F's in all 3 years. When we break it down by each race, the representation of students who are American Indian increases from A's to F's. Of the number of A's earned, there was approximately 0.2% of those A's were students who are American Indian. Of the number of F's earned, there were approximately 1.5% of those F's were students who are American Indian. When looking at the demographic makeup of our high school, as seen in the table, there is an underrepresentation of A's and an overrepresentation in the percentage of F's earned. The representation of students who are Asian stays consistent from A's to F's, except in 2021. In semester 2, we saw an increase of the representation of F's for students who are Asian, and later Dave and Kurt will address what they believe to be the root cause of the increase of these F's. The representation of students who are Black also increases from A's to F's. There is an underrepresentation in A's when looking at the demographic makeup in the high schools, but an overrepresentation in the F's. The representation of students who are Hispanic also increases from A's to F's. There is also an underrepresentation of A's and an overrepresentation in the F's. The representation of students who are Pacific Isle also increases from A's to F's. And the representation of students who are 2 or more also increases from A's to F's, but the increase was more defined in 2021 school year. There is also an underrepresentation in A's and an overrepresentation of F's in this category. The graph changes directions when looking at students who are white. The opposite is seen from other demographic groups. The representation of students who are white decreases from A's to F's, and there is an overrepresentation in A's and an underrepresentation in the F's, according to our demographic makeup. When disaggregating the data by gender consistently every year, there's a higher representation of students who are female that it gets A's compared to the representation of females who get F's. When looking at the demographic makeup by gender, the representation of students who are female decreases from A's to F's. Comparing the data to the enrollment of females in our high school, there is an overrepresentation in A's and an underrepresentation of F's. The representation of students who are males increases from A's to F's. There is an underrepresentation in A's for males when looking at the demographic makeup in our high schools, but an overrepresentation of F's. When disaggregating the data by English proficiency, consistently every year, students who are limited English proficiency, the grade mark representation from A's to B's, B's to C's, C's to D's increased in semester 2. In 17-18 and 18-19, the percentage of D's to F's decreased, and this was not true in 2021. The percentage of D's to F's for limited English proficient students increased by 1.2%. When looking at the demographic makeup based on English proficiency, in 2021, there's an underrepresentation of A's and an overrepresentation of D's and F's for students with limited English proficiency. The opposite was true for English proficient students. The representation of students who are English proficient decreases for the representation of A's to F's in 2020-21. We do see an uptick in other years, but last year we did see that decline. When looking at the demographic makeup of the English proficiency in that year, underrepresentation in the F grade marks of students who are not English proficient. This is another way that we disaggregated the data, but our special education population, they have students that get A's through F's, but over 30% of the population, special ed population, get satisfactory or unsatisfactory, which we are not reporting here. So there are going to be some things that you're going to, like if you're a mathematician, you'll be like, that doesn't add up. But that would be why, because there are some grades that aren't shown on here. When looking at the demographic makeup of students by special education, the grade mark representation from A's to B's, B's to C's, and C's to D's, and D's to F's increased for SPED students in the representation of that letter grade. The only year there was a decrease in the representation of students who earned an F was in 2020-21 for students who are in special education. When looking at the demographic makeup by special education, the representation of students who are in special education increases from A's to F's in 17-18 and 18-19. In 2021, the percentage of D's to F's decreases. And the opposite was true for students who are not special education. The representation of students who are not special ed decreases for the representation of A's to F's, except for 2021. The representation of F's earned increases from D's for students who are not in special education. When disaggregating the data by socioeconomic, consistently every year, there's a higher representation of not economically disadvantaged students who get A's compared to the representation of not economically disadvantaged students who receive F's. In 2017-18, the difference between A's to F's for students who are not economically disadvantaged was a decrease of 14.5%. In 18-19, it was a decrease of 23.1%. And in 2021, there was a decrease of 9%. When looking at students who are economically disadvantaged, the largest increases in the percentage of Ds to Fs. In 17-18, it increased by 9.8%. In 18-19, it increased from Ds to Fs by 15.1%. And in 2021, it increased by 5.9%. The opposite is true for not economically disadvantaged. There's a downward trend of A's to Fs, with the biggest decrease coming from D's to Fs. There's an overrepresentation of A's and an underrepresentation of Fs. And now I'm going to pass it over to Dave and Kurt, and they're going to talk about the organizational structures we put in place last year and the organizational structures we're going to put in place in the coming years and some requests.
Good evening, everyone. Some of the identifications that Dave and I identified as high school leaders from last year was the large percentage of students that went into the virtual school that we were trying to staff. There was a big combination of finding quality educators to teach in the virtual environment. And for the last few years, I think we've all understood, even from what Dr. Johnson said, there's been a teacher shortage for the last few years. And we saw that big time in the 100% virtual world trying to staff that. We had many students in different classes, and it wasn't the ideal setting, but we were able to get through it with the support of our exec team and hiring staff. We were hiring into September, well, as the virtual world was going on. So we were doing a lot of manipulation of schedules to make sure that people could get into the virtual world from the start. Then students participated in in-person learning for 2 days a week. While it wasn't a perfect model, it was a model that kept us in school and had students seeing teachers face to face every time of the year, every week, excuse me. And well, students we saw get more D's and F's because we didn't really know how to communicate with the 3-day at home environment for students. Students were watching siblings. We were hearing a lot of anecdotal data and stories from parents that it's hard to learn in that environment. And we were able to attribute that a lot of the D's and F's did come from that 3-day work week at home, because there was little to no support for teachers in that face-to-face environment.
And some additional items that were a barrier to student achievement in the last school year. So as students would come to our building and be identified as a close contact or COVID-19 positive, and then have more interruption of the face-to-face learning. So then there would be more of students learning remotely and at home, and stretching the ability for us to support them as they're away from the building. Then the balance of in-person and virtual environment was simply new for students and staff, right? So we have staff that has been professionally developed in many different ways at both of the high schools, but teaching in a blended learning in a virtual and a remote setting was new to everyone. And we spent a lot of time with support from the teaching and learning department to PD about how to do that through the year. We increased our ability, or at least decreased our variance in the experience that a student would have based on their instructor and their ability to provide the virtual environment. So this was the push for us to go one-to-one. We added additional technologies such as OWL cameras and things of that nature. And then simply we're able to learn the practices of Canvas and something called Nearpod and those things as they went in place really in real time as we rolled out the real unique and different platform that we just simply hadn't prepared previous to last year. So organizational structures at Memorial that we are working on this year to roll out to react to some of the data that you've seen and address some of the learning gaps that we anticipate students that will come to the building with here starting in about 2 weeks. So identifying student. Or talking about, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead, sorry. So so some of the things we're going to react to from last year for this year, thank you, Kurt, is identifying students on the DF list and then tracking that DF list and monitoring the progress of students with instructors. So we coordinated attendance and DF lists, and then did family outreach to address some of those gaps that we saw as the school year went on. And we will embed some of those practices in the upcoming year as well. So working with staff to engage in alternate assessments and weighting of grades. We did some adjustments and grading practices as the year went on, talking about the value of a grade and what does it mean to grade on a standard and what students are able to know and do versus some of the more traditional practices. And then as we return students on May 3rd for 4-day-a-week instruction, we embedded intervention time and enrichment time and support time for the afternoon portion for students so that we could target students specifically that have really had academic struggles through much of the school year. And I think we saw some pretty good return on investment to that. And we want to capture some of those concepts as we move into the next year. So previous virtual learning classes then were also added to the instructional model, the face-to-face instructional model in the afternoon, and those periods that we embedded in the afternoon. So for the first time, students and their instructor were able to work in a face-to-face environment. And then periods 6 through 9 also worked as intervention time, as we talked about, and that was informed by academic progress, predominantly the D and F list. And then at Memorial, before we were able to bring all the students back, we began to bring students that we identified through academic concern on the DF list, through identification of family interest in the guidance department to do outreach, bringing students in on Wednesday afternoons. We started doing that later in February, and we did that through some really critical or tier 3 students. And we saw on average about 24 students or so on Wednesday afternoons that we targeted for that intervention. So that's jumping ahead. So thanks, Kurt. Some of these things I talked about here, I will did allude to what we will keep in place some of these what we thought is best practices for the upcoming school year.
So at North, Michelle mentioned talking about our Asian identified students, and anecdotal data that I have just from speaking to families of actually students of mine that were speaking on behalf of their family is they were given advice to, because of their large family dynamics, having elders that are older in the house and having young children in the house, they're advised to stay home during the beginning of the school year and go 100% virtual, not knowing what that looked like. That also contributed to them not understanding how to work the technology, needing help from technology. It was something that we identified at the beginning of the year, how to get outreach to these family members to get support with their technology. But right from the start, it was a difficult task for these students to succeed in the virtual world with that communication barrier that a lot of the families have. I even had, from what I can remember, 5 families seek me out on our Wednesday COVID days to come talk to me to see if they could get back into school. And that was in the spring when we really got the COVID clinics on Wednesdays at North going. And they knew that I was in the building through email, and they would come try to talk and see if there were some things that we could get going for them to help them with their grades. So that's the only anecdotal data that I have, that the families were struggling in the Asian community in Eau Claire about how to access the technology in appropriate ways with, like Dave alluded to earlier, in the Canvas platforms to get good grades and keep up with their classes. So we, like Dave mentioned, we did identify Ds and Fs. We used our data warehouse system to identify specific students. We started working with those students through our counseling department, through teachers directly, so that they can identify students that they are working with. That was a daily email that was blasted out, and we were identifying how many Fs and Ds and Fs that we had within the building every day, who was working. We were working with teachers, departments, et cetera, to lower that D and F list. We created grading expectations, the power of 0, so that every student's grades went to a 50%, so they could work off of that as a baseline. The statistics of getting a 0 from turning something in, it's amazing how much you have to do at 100% just to offset that 0%. So we worked towards that because it was difficult for students to communicate with their teachers and turn in things through Canvas. Sometimes there were some technology issues that we wanted to implement. When students returned on May 3rd for 4 days of face-to-face instruction. It was something that we talked about, and we knew that was coming, or not, we knew it was coming, but we had some time to game plan. And I want to commend North's leadership team of department chairs that worked with me on this. And we committed to the 1 through 5 periods, just like Dave and the Memorial constituents did. But we decided to go periods 6 through 10. And as we talked about this, 2 individuals, Todd Carlson Sather and Scott Hensiak, were hearing me talk, like, how can we schedule kids in an appropriate way? And we came up with a flexible scheduling module. And I'm not a techie person, but I affectionately call them technology geeks. But they were able to create the QR codes, and we handed students these QR codes, and it pulled up their schedule right for them. And they were able to sit down with teachers with guidance for 20 minutes, identify their weaknesses, identified where they wanted to target their DNF. These Fs, where they wanted help, we had accelerated students identify if they were in an AP class, if they needed support with that teacher, we populated those classes. So students were able to be responsible for their education, which was a very powerful thing for us. And we saw excellent results in our DNF list towards the end of the year.
So our updating our organizational structures as we're coming into the next school year. So one of the interventions that we're going to put in place or new tools or strategies at Memorial High School, something called extended learning time. So real briefly, what this will look like is 3 days a week. We will have a block of time during the school day that it's universal access for all students to receive additional academic coaching, support, enrichment opportunities to dive deeper into a course in which maybe the student is successful but has a deeper interest. And then equally as important, supporting a student that may be showing up on the DF list. We know that through research, students that fail a course are 30% less likely to graduate high school in 4 years, right? And doing that is clearly a post-secondary barrier. When that occurs, it's clearly a barrier to post-secondary access for students. We also know that students are 4 times as likely to graduate on time if they pass all of their courses, right? So the research from the Chicago Public Schools have shared that with us. So using that research and this tool, we're going to target students that are on the DF list. We have something universal for all students, but really that would be our point of emphasis, to make sure students are at some proficiency level as they move through, especially our 9th and 10th grade students, so that we can increase the graduation rate. We will cull the amount of students that may fail, and we do that to increase the access to universal access to our upper level courses, more programming, and then increase access to whatever post-secondary ACP plan or travel that student is on. So in addition to this, we've embedded professional learning communities with common prep time in the master schedule. So all 4 of the core areas, they have the largest amount of instructors, so you're able to do so in the master schedule and still provide enough English courses, for example, through the school day that you can block off 1 period, for example, 2nd period, where all English instructors will have an opportunity to collaborate during the day. So Hattie tells us that, John Hattie tells us in his research that collaboration is one of the highest return on investments that schools can do to improve student achievement. So we've embedded that in all the core areas. That's an organizational structure that we've been striving towards. Last year, we found through the time off that we did have on Wednesdays where the teachers had time to do the ELO piece. We had that block of time as we did all the cleaning in the building on Wednesdays, and instructors are able to come together and collaborate. That through the work of the teaching and learning department and the ELOs, we found instructors coming together on a more consistent and a manner in which we're able to replicate. So we're going to put that in the master schedule for this year. And then with the introduction of extended learning time at Memorial High School, we also have a block of time where we have universal access for all students to something called ACP lessons, right? We've done that for the last couple of years, and then added to that character strong curriculum. So a new curriculum that we're rolling out that talks about all the different more softer skills and social emotional learning and support for students embedded in a series of lessons that we'll introduce to students 9th through 12th grade, and they're tailored to be age appropriate and fit, for lack of a better term, at each grade level. That's something we'll do on Mondays, generally do on Mondays. And then at Memorial High School, we'll now have 3 instructional coaches. Historically, we have 1. Now we'll have 3 instructional coaches to help the administrative team and the department chairs, and then grade level leaders to coaching within the classroom, content coaching around assessment practices, and then a push in some of the things that we just talked about here. And one of the strategies is an instructional coach may sub for Dave, so Dave can go in and watch Commissioner Lyons' class. Another opportunity is for the instructional coach to go out and do some research on some different instructional practices that may be more real-time, informative, that give more immediate feedback in the classroom. Again, John Hattie's research tells us that meaningful and real-time formative feedback to instructors in the classroom is another very high rate of return towards student achievement. So those are some of the things that our instructional coaches will help us at Memorial High School. We're very excited about those things introduced into the building to be tools to help address some of the things that Michelle and Jim highlighted previously.
Dave and I have collaborated on a lot of this throughout the year, and we all know, and we've heard very many times, that last year was a year like any other year. So what we've done is we've also at North, we've modified our schedule. So we have a 30-minute block, in the middle between second and third hour that we have called Husky time, that will allow students to work and identify kind of that flexible scheduling need. Where does a student need support? And we're going to be able to provide that support based off of data and collaboration, like Dave mentioned before, through our departments, having common prep time for our math, English, and science department. So we have those common preps where students will be able, or teachers will be able to identify students that they need to work with in a more intensive basis. And again, like Dave talked about, we've implemented the coaches in the areas of math, English, and social emotional learning. They'll also be game planning with teachers deliver a lesson during our Husky time for students to focus on that social emotional learning, also in how to bolster our math and English scores. We also have student success advocates, such as a behavioral interventionist. Ms. Sturgis is here. Freshman success advocate. So we want, to go off the data that Dave was presenting before, we want students at North to get off on the right foot right from the start. They want to have a lasting relationship with a mentor within the building. And we have a student achievement advocate that will work with a caseload of students that feel disenfranchised from the school, or that they don't feel supported in some way. They'll have that person that they'll be able to work with. And like I mentioned before, we have that common prep time. It's been a real great opportunity for Dave and I to collaborate together so that we can give students in the Eau Claire School District a very close and similar experience, at both high schools. And we've been able to target students in the same way so that they can have meaningful success in the Eau Claire School District.
Jim, Michelle, Kurt, and Dave, thank you for the presentation tonight. It's not always easy to look at data where we see the low end of the grades going up, but I appreciate your willingness to be here to share with us some of those plans for the future. Comments and questions for our presenters. Dr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you for providing the information and outlining some things. I guess for me, what was missing, and I'm wondering if you guys know the answer. So, what academic areas were represented in that DNF data, and so can the amount of learning be the account, can it be quantified in some kind of way? What are those academic areas? Can it be quantified where majority of those D's and F's? And the reason is as we're entering this new year, the good ideas that you have going into, can we focus those to really assess and intervene what was actually missed? Where do we see the majority of that happening? What's still needed? Because potentially, I think the universal approaches that you outline, that's great for everyone. However, in that data, what's present also is there's this intersectionality between some of the cultural pieces and the type of learning environments that were impacting that. And so I'm curious, how do we take it a little bit further? And I actually have probably like 4 questions and 1 comment. I'll send this to everyone, but I'm just curious, you know, I appreciate that, but what are the actual areas? Because what we see nationally, math, English, it's pretty bad. They're saying that 3 to 6 months of instructional time is lost, depending on the type of learning environment that actually students. So do we have any of that data, or I'm just curious? Oh, okay.
Yes. So the grade data that you saw tonight was all grades, so in all academic areas. But we do have the ability to disaggregate that data by just math, by just ELA. And that's one of the tools that we are going to put in place next year, is for their teams to work with that data and those department chairs, that they're going to be able to say, okay, where are we at in the math department with our Ds and Fs? Where are we at in the English department with our Ds and Fs, and all the departments? And we just talked today, you know, what are some data rules? You know, where will those interventions be? Math and ELA probably will be the focus. And then after that, then we'll go into the other required subject areas. The other question that you asked, and I think I had on one of the very first slides, our most significant occurrence that happens in grades is in A's. You know, we give the most A's than any other grade, and that's sitting at about 50%. And it's about 10% of our grades are Ds and Fs. So it's not an astronomical amount, but it's still a lot. And so we need to, you know, pay attention to those.
Yeah, and if I could just follow up, I think that it's just that astronomical piece, though, of it is that even that small percentage, given who's impacted by it, and potentially what that potentially could lead through in terms of their ability to navigate the remainder of their time, I think that's important. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So the uptick, I think you're talking in our students of color.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Johnson, I think you might have said you had 4 questions in or.
Yeah, no, I'm good. What I will do is actually, I will email the Superintendent Johnson and then have him pass it along. And then if you guys could just follow up at any point in time, I'd be appreciative.
Yeah, thank you.
So I think this just piggybacks on this idea of there's more here than we can see. And you guys have, I mean, you can probably tease this out in 1,000 different ways, which I think is great. And I think it's wonderful that you're doing that. I think that's really important. And the thing that I think, you know, what I will be excited to hear is what area let's say literacy, let's just take it, right? It's a big one. It's a big one for equity. It's a big one. What moves the needle, right? Like here we are, we can look at this data. So as we monitor this over the coming months, years, some of us, like what will move the needle? And so these things are great. And I want to see student success advocates be like the thing that moves the needle. So I think it'll be really important for us to see that data shook out in different ways so we can see the problem and then we can see the solution and we can watch it move forward. I think that will help me feel really confident in what we're doing. Not just, you know, what the results of what we're doing are. But the question I have in that vein is socioeconomic status. Why'd that get better? Like the data shows this, what overall do you guys feel like why did those students do better in this really hard year when everyone else was really struggling? Why was the data better? So, I mean, that's just one thing of like, what were the things that we were doing? Was it more time at home? Was it just better supports? Was it food? What were the things that were in place that we're making it, am I reading the data right? Did I understand that correctly?
They increased their, in our economically disadvantaged students, they made an increase in that time. So if you go back.
Sorry,
It's there.
I'm tired.
Yeah.
So, I'm talking about the 2021 school year. It's significantly
Yeah.
better
Yeah.
than the last measurable year before. And it was a really hard year. So my question is what was there for those students either at home, in the classroom? I mean, obviously from the year before, it's in the middle, it's an average between the two, but I'm just curious of like, were there things in place for those students? Did we do things? Or was it just chance? Was it just chance that it looks that way?
And again, I don't have any concrete data, but I do know that when we opened up schools on May 3rd, that I had students that said, thank you, I needed this. They were excited about being back. The power of zero that a lot of teachers did embrace and incorporate into their classrooms. They said, you know what, now I have a chance, so now I will get some things done rather than just assume that, I mean, a zero is a devastating thing, especially in the time that we were experiencing here. So it was a powerful change, something that we'd like to pursue a little bit. I can only speak for me. I don't want to speak for Dave, but that I would like to pursue more because it did give students a fighting chance. And they saw that there was something that they could get accomplished and get to a threshold where they could get a credit. So I don't have anything specifically to say. There was a strategy that we implemented, but we kind of did with the power of zero practicing grading within the classroom.
We maybe isolated for time better as we brought all the students back from May 3rd. I think that's fair to say. In addition to Kurt's comments, we really worked with students and staff, more students, to work around that learned helplessness. If I missed something that was supposed to be due 6 weeks ago, let's remove any real or perceived academic punishment to that, right? Well, like, I'm gonna have 5%, late penalty or something. Even something like that can be a deterrent for a student. I was a great math student. You tell me, well, I'm going to get a 0 and I don't have to do the assignment. I'd say, well, it's a win for me. So I don't have to do the assignment and you can give me a 0, right? Working around that piece and then having embedded intervention time in the afternoon to work with students that maybe had previously fell into that bucket. I would point to that as something I could say that we intentionally did as the school year went along. Especially as we brought all the students back on May 3, that Wednesday afternoon intervention time was very valuable for a small group of students that we were able to get there, right? Because you didn't necessarily provide transportation at universal access, but the May 3 piece was universal access. So, and I think there's something, I don't have any data on this, but I'm going to say addressing some of the food scarcity issues most likely had some value too. I can't quantify that.
Yeah, I mean, that was just the only slide I looked at and I was like, well, it's better than, I mean, that's the best, for the data that we have. And so what did we do that was the ending F data is the best compared to all the other slides. So, that's kind of what I'm looking for is like, well,
sure.
Are there things that were better, that we improved, that we should keep doing?
That the EMLSS system that we use to guide our work, that organizational structures is the basis of what we're doing, right? So we're trying to grab what we're fairly sure, pretty confident of the successes that we had last year, to fold those in as interventions, common plan time, that kind of business, and then ground that to the EMLSS organizational structure. So ELT time or Husky time is an organizational structure informed by the data that we've talked about, right? Professional learning communities, Hattie's told us that, right? But now universal access for the instructors to do all the good things that we want to do in PLC, we could list a million of them. And that is a universal practice that helps raise all students. Some students are going to come to our building and need less universal support. This is a way we can provide universal support for all students. So I think that's really the efficacy of what we're embarking on.
Dr. Bika.
This was our first year in high school with the change to no enriched courses, honors courses, et cetera. Do you think there's any relationship between this model and the data that you've discussed tonight?
It will be, that will be an interesting thing for us to monitor as the year moves along, because this will be the first year that we've intentionally grouped students at the 9th and 10th grade without that, that bifurcation practice of the middle courses. So one of the things that we are highly interested in monitoring is how do all students achieve at the 9th and 10th grade level, right? That A's in this manner continue to be A's, but where are we able to raise the D's and the F's, the students that maybe just aren't learning at the same rate as the student next to them, and the ELT time maybe is the antidote to help with that additional instructional time. But as answering your question, but that's what we're going to intentionally do this year to support students that would need a little bit more support, but then also enrich students that previously would at least perceived that would be enriched in a different course. We know we can vet all that within a course, and Jim's department is helping us with one thing about intentional grouping. How do you teach talented and gifted students that are embedded in it? And of course, then you have all learners. So that's some PD that we do throughout the year. I don't know if that's a great answer for you, Dr.
No, I think my instinct though is that there's just so many variables. I don't think you can identify. I knew there was going to be a challenge for them to even schedule enrich, even if we had not changed that practice this year. I mean, I remember when they were doing their scheduling about a year ago, they said, well, it's a good thing we can't even do it if we wanted to. But the number of variables involved, I think, were so many. We really won't know the impact of probably until this, assuming this year is a 5-day experience the entire year. I think we would have a better feel for whether or not how that change will impact those data.
That's an interesting question.
Commissioner Clemens.
So thanks for providing us this data. I think it's one important indicator, the grades. I think that there are others that we need to keep track of in order to ensure that our multi-level system of support is succeeding. I think there are other academic benchmarks we'd like to see over time as well. I don't know what those all are because I'm not an educator, and so I don't know what analyses are available. But during the public comment, we had about a dozen people who shared, their personal stories about how they've been challenged by our existence over the past 2 years. And if you've expressed, I think very succinctly how the district continues to respond to people regardless of where they are and the things that they're experiencing, both in the classroom and in their lives, to ensure that they're getting the support that they need to succeed. But I'm interested to see more kind of beyond the grades, just other indicators, kind of the social emotional metrics. Are these things that we do track, and are we able to respond to those things in a way that recognize that we're looking at the whole child, the whole community, and not just kind of what their GPA looks like.
Yeah, we had a meeting today, and we really do believe in multiple measures, that you should not just take one thing and run with it, that you need to look at, many things to round out a child. And one of the things that we're working with the high schools on is that they look at, we have a report that they can look at that it couples their attendance with their behavior, with their grades. And then it allows them to see, look at a quick glance, where are each of these students? And we're working with the counselors to use that data to meet with students with that data. We're also doing some correlation studies that are grades correlated to our ACT and our ACT Aspire in those core areas. So what does that look like too? Are they telling us the same story? Are they telling us different stories? And all of those reports, they are able to disaggregate that data on all different areas of demographic groups. Does that help answer?
It does.
Okay.
I
think we're moving in that direction to, and we're really right now building our systems to be able to make that successful with our staff.
One thing that last year taught us at North was that once we saw our DNF data, it was almost too late already. We want to get better and more honest data sooner so that we can make decisions during our Husky time to affect students in a positive way. So that's what the work that Michelle's doing with both high schools to help us. So I'm really excited about that. And I've mentioned it to a few department chairs already. They're excited about it to get going. And examining individual classes, practices and such so that we can target students in a positive.
Yeah, follow up. So, so you described how you use some of the grade indicators to kind of both respond and kind of anticipate who is likely to benefit from additional attention and what that might be. What are some of the non-grade level things that you use to indicators you use to respond to that student might be doing okay academically, but that seems like they're really struggling because of these other indicators? Can you talk just a little bit about how you do that?
The first thing we do is we look at something that's a little bit more obvious as attendance, as a student simply coming to school. And if they're coming to school or they're coming to school from the start of the day to the end of the day, that actually tells us quite a bit, right? So students, especially the older students, they'll vote with their feet. They don't see themselves in your school, they're not going to stay there, right? And then at least at Memorial, and I think the same for Kurt, then we work through both the assistant principals and the guidance folks. How do we get them there? Now, once we get the student in, now what are we going to do for them? So we know that we've had some small amounts of push in for mental health counseling and coaching and some things of that nature. What we're rolling out this year at the high schools that we're very excited about is universal access to character strong curriculum. Part of that SCL piece is helping a student, hopefully anyway, to build some of those skills about perseverance, right? Advocating for help, advocating for success, and then also helping our staff be able to build their ability to do that in the classroom. I was a government teacher. I think I have some skills at that. This isn't something that I've been PD'd on or had a lot of training before you get to a school. So that's our piece, right? Building giving the students a few more tools and giving some staff some resources to be able to do some intervention right in the classroom. We know the strongest relationship in the school is between the teacher and the student. So it's empowering the instructor to have a few more tools to be able to do those things. As we can do some tier 3 things over here, we've got some structures in place for that now.
And something that is something that we're excited about at North is our freshman success advocate. And she has a curriculum through the RTI Center, which works on exit tickets throughout the year for students. That'll be quick and honest data that students will be able to send her back. Michelle's working with Amber to create, these exit tickets in a format where we can get the data from the students right away, so we can identify if there's any needs that they're experiencing still continuing through the COVID world. So. Dave's exactly right. Our assistant principals, it wasn't a favorable year for them to work with students last year because of, attendance is the number one thing that they work with a student on, and to make sure that they knock down barriers for them to get to school and be successful. And just with the quarantining and the close contact tracing and everything like that, it was hard to establish a pattern for students to be in our.
If last year showed us nothing, it showed us that students belong in school with their teachers 5 days a week.
Thank you.
Not seeing Commissioner Lyons or Commissioner Harder jump in. I'm going to end our discussion here with 2 requests. I don't need a response tonight. I would just like some follow-up. The first is I sent a question to Superintendent Johnson just asking about what should we expect the impact of these interventions to be, specifically on the Ds and Fs. And I got a small result. This is an indicator. And we understand, I think, many of the core reasons, but it certainly is an area where I would feel uncomfortable rating the district anything other than failing to make adequate progress towards our desired results. Just on this thing. Now, you talked about how it's a larger picture, right? And our R2 is going to encompass more than just the Ds and Fs. It's not one thing, but this is an area that we know we're struggling with, and especially when we bring in the idea that this has a significant impact on our ability to graduate students. And that is our mega result, is all students graduate. And so I'd like to know a little bit more about, as we look for next year to see this, what should we be looking for as a marker? I don't necessarily want to put on and hold to you like this is exactly the number we're going to get, because of course every situation is contextually unique. But should we expect to see basically a regression back to that consistency that we had seen beforehand? Because really as Dr. Johnson brought up, this has profound impacts. And so our goal should be to eliminate even that baseline, especially of the Fs. And I think as an education person who had a chance to study lots of facets of ed in my graduate work, Like the move towards power of zero grading is amazing. And the way that we look at grades and really look for that is great. So I'd like to just know, like, what should we expect as board members when we hear about this again next year to know, are we making adequate progress to addressing this particular issue? And then in terms of data, we're getting better at disaggregating. We're seeing all of these things. I would like to just have some background about what our capacity is to do more interaction with crosstab and regression analysis, because as we look at, our students of color are rising, but also our low socioeconomic students show a rise, and it might be slightly different year to year. And as we look to address in a policy way, how can we support these students so that we make sure we're not putting any barriers in place and in fact tearing barriers down? We want to be able to attribute our policy moves accordingly. And so I'm hopeful that we can move from just being able to see lines and the breakdown we didn't always used to get. We are making progress. But the next step is, how do we ensure that we're targeting the right factors, or that we can account for what parts of these different things so that we don't misattribute? And I recognize there's going to be some challenge because of small sample sizes. And so, but I think I'd like to hear more about what's our capacity to do that? What will it take to be able to analyze it in a more robust way so we can look at the underlying principles more than just the individual lines?
I can tell you that excites me a lot, because we've worked this summer at developing our tool to be able to do that. And crosstabs, I mean, we can hash it many different ways. And that's the tool that we are sending out to our principals and their staff to use. So it is going to be much more analytical.
Great. I'd love to just, get some information about where's our capacity at and how can we use that. So, and that can just come through Superintendent Johnson as a memo, and then, on what are our expected goals? Let's set those goals and say, this is our goal. We might have to come back next year and say, we said we were going to hit this and we didn't. And here's how we're going to continue to get better. But let's set a goal and move. Yeah, so I'd just love to hear more specifics about what our actual goals are on this. So thank you all for tonight. Obviously, we've gone longer than we intended, so we'll end it here. If you have additional questions, of course, board members, send them through Superintendent Johnson so that we can get more information. At this time, we're going to move on to matters reserved for board action. Tonight, we have one quick item. It's adopt a referendum timeline. Abby, if you could give me, a 1 to 2 minute, just an update on, I know this was a discussion in budget development, but just, we've had the changes to look at, and we know that we're just setting it for the November timeline for referendum. But if you could just summarize it really briefly, and then we can hopefully take a rapid action.
Sure. Yep. I think really just the changes that we made, we're talking about updating some of the dates and the timelines, so that way then the board kind of knew what were those big benchmarks that they needed to make. And so the couple of things that we talked about at budget development were a facility study and a community survey, and just where would that fall in the timeline, and what would the next steps be to help guide the work of the board. And then really just looking at, we had a little bit of a conversation about operational needs. There have been some questions about operational needs, and we shared and talked at budget development that we really need to gather some more information, and we would feel more comfortable adding that into the conversation after we have our finalized budget for the 21-22 school year. So this timeline that's presented tonight is really just a reflection to update what the dates are, and then to say this is a potential timeline for a November 2022 referendum.
Thank you. Any comments or questions for Abby on the timeline? Hearing none, I would hear a motion to adopt the referendum timeline as proposed.
So moved.
Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. We'll move on to our last business item for the night. That is monitoring district results. And this is our first draft night for OE2, the district's equity commitment. Superintendent Johnson, I will hand it off to you.
Thank you and good evening. This has been an interesting, where the phrase where the rubber meets the road, with my interpretation of OE2. And I'm looking forward to it tonight, but carefully so, because it seemed like all the other districts that we've been able to examine that are in coherent governance, talking about a superintendent succession plan. It was pretty easy to look through all 5 of them. They all had something. There are no OE2s. There are no equity. So this was a bold move by our board. Very much in support of that. But it's a blank slate, so it's a great opportunity. And after 2 weeks ago, I thought about this quite a bit, and I think within the next 2 weeks, because the next time we will meet formally would be on 13th of September, I believe. I think within 2 weeks with the discussion that we have today, your suggestions, your items that you bring up, the dialogue we have, and I'll be taking notes, obviously, and hopefully answering some questions. And in some cases, maybe I won't. I'm looking forward to probably 2 weeks being able to compose something for all of you so that I would get it to you ahead of time. And then, with indicators, with evidence, a full week before we would place everything together for the regular board packet. So I think that, with what we experienced with the superintendent succession plan, where it was very, very straightforward, yet there were some questions that I kind of thought to myself, had I done this a week sooner and placed or maybe asked certain questions, I think I could have helped. And I think 2 weeks ago, the board was awfully rough on itself when I don't think you needed to be. I think I could have helped that process even more. So that's why I think with this one, this is so important and so critical to our work. But the good thing is we have until September 13th to be able to do so. So I'd like to go through this with you. Like I said, it's a blank slate. But I won't read the superintendent interpretation as it reads right there. If you could scroll up a little bit, Meta. If the board would like me to, I will. But I wanted, with some dialogue that I've had, some feedback I've had, I would like to alter this the next time it comes through. I'd like to note and edit the following, but not do so until after our meeting tonight to include more definitions. Terms educational equity. While we may think in this room and maybe with this audience, yeah, I think we've got that down pat. I think we need to be very clear for any stakeholder in our entire district, and that just means other communities as well. So I wanted to put down educational equity, anti-racist, and anti-bias. I believe we need to consider those. Those aren't typical terms, but once again, when we'll be talking about this later on with this interpretation throughout, when we talk about our professional development with our staff, we want to have that common language and common definitions because we've heard that quite often. Having that stated clearly, coherently, consistently for our stakeholders, I think it's going to be very positive, that common understanding. I'll utilize our equity statement a bit more for clarity in addressing those definitions. So once again, it's parallel. We see it throughout, that's that anchor document that we have. Also define the policy and procedures individually to guide us for internal and external stakeholders. To then scroll up a little bit more about the superintendent may not create or maintain inequity or demonstrably lessen equity within the district. Fairly brief interpretation, but I think what I'd like to add there is another change I would like to include. What happens when it says that I'm not going to create or maintain inequity or lessen it within the district, but what happens when I find it? What am I going to do? Because according to this, if I found it and I just sat on it and I kept it secret, well, that wouldn't be very ethical and it wouldn't be the right thing to do. So I think it should be in there. Another change I'd like to include, if inequity is discovered or is noted to exist, my responsibility would be to address that issue. So be more active as opposed to passive. We're going to scroll down a touch more with the plan for equity work to be achieved in the district and what it should, the annual 5, 10, 20-year goals, including targets, plans for data to measure success, research-based rationale for the actions, addressing issues of access outcomes, policy practice within the district. We'll definitely talk more about policy a little bit later. But I think with this, I'm just gonna share this right now. We will not be compliant in this. I do not have a 5-year plan. I don't have a 10-year plan. Certainly don't have a 20-year plan. That's the key with our equity steering committee. I think they're critical in this. As we're planning right now, we probably have about 1.5 to 2 years out. One of those tremendous steps is this, our equity steering committee, but also getting all our staff on board with the professional development this year that we're enjoying with Jody Thiesing-Ritter and others. So those are the things, just sharing that right now with the board. I'm not just going to say, well, we're going to rush this together and maybe just get a checklist so we can say that we've got a 5-year plan. We don't. We would not be compliant in that. But once again, the good, the bad, and the ugly, just like we talk about our results, every grade level who's come before us to the board and in the public, we've shared the good, the bad, and the ugly. So otherwise, if we don't do that, we don't find out how we've become better. Why? So, for example, some items within this plan, maybe for some indicators, and maybe you think the same thing too, would be, the composition of our steering committee and the outcomes of that committee and how often we meet, what we accomplish. Another might be, the professional development modules themselves and a percentage of the staff that are taking part in this based on department, based on school. We got to shoot for 100%. If we're saying all staff. And then others, for example, for indicators could be, examining our systems assessment, telling us whether academic or behavioral systems are in place. Those can be things that I think can help us. If we scroll down a bit more to number 2, publish for the community an annual update as to the achievement of the goals in the equity work plan. Like I said, fairly straightforward, but items to consider, to note, would be maybe our professional development discussion about, when would the board like this published? Would we do it toward the end of the school year? And I think that would then be our baseline. When we're determined to do it, then we would go ahead every year thereafter to do so. Could it be, other indicators could be our policy work. How often updating our policy throughout the school year with an equitable lens. For example, 100% of our policies would have gender neutral language. I mean, that would be a goal. That could be a target. Possibly generating pulse surveys for our progress, measuring student family voice, as well as the equity steering committee. So those are other things that I thought of that I think we could use here. If we could scroll down to number 3, Maida, about the organizational professional development structures at school, admin, district levels to promote our work toward increasing it. We have talked about this, I believe, quite often. I won't read my interpretation of it. I had shared that with you earlier. But I am proud of what we've tried to alter thus far in preparation for this year. Like I think I may have shared before, when certain things are working, we're told by the DPI that, when certain structures in our school are working, or within our district, for example, our EL data, where we're, our growth, our achievement, our progress is like in the top 5% of the state. And they're asking about DeLong Middle School. What's going on there? Well, we've got to replicate it. Instead of other levels and other schools saying, well, I'd maybe like to do it this way, or I'd like to change it. No, let's replicate what's working, because something's really going on. Maybe we look to the elementary schools feeding into DeLong. Maybe that's something that's happening right there. But once again, when we get those results where we all agree that they're successful, replicate them. Maybe it's that professional development. But we've got to have it occur at all levels, all schools, all departments. This isn't negotiated. I don't want to say negotiate. Well, I'll just do this later, or I'll do this other type of professional development, where all of us do. And that's what I'm really proud of for this year. Then next year, we may find that, hey, there are some others that really want to go a little bit higher, or they want to achieve a bit more. But it could have that flexibility for us. Educational tools to the community. Let's see, meaning of educational equity, we did discuss that before, how it benefits all students. And, that was noteworthy back in July when we had our, we had the opportunity that night at the little theater with Memorial, when people were interested in that. There were some views that thought, well, we're not going to, our white students, we're just going to let them stay the way that, and we're just going to put all our resources. No, this will benefit all students. The work, we have to articulate that. We have to share that. That's good for all. And how then we approach our commitment to building equity. And I alluded to it in the last part of that paragraph. Multiple approaches. Our evaluations of staff, your evaluation of me. I know that there's a tremendous component. There's equity throughout. And that's the same thing holds true with our administration. The same thing would hold true with our teachers and staff. We need to participate in this. We need to grow. We need to know where we are, and we need to know to do better. Our organizational structures, EMLSS, for example, academic standards, our achievement, our PD models, all those things to be able to share with the community on our equity page, but not just on an equity page, but in multiple modes here at a board meeting with presentations on results. I think that's another powerful venue for us too. If we were to scroll down again, with existing policy and practice, I guess with that item, areas of inequity, adopting changes to address those areas. That has to begin before progress is monitored. And we're organizing that right now. Kim Kohler is leading the charge on this, where we're taking our OE and R, and we're taking existing policy and we're trying to match those up. Looking at the age of the policy, obviously the board, there will be some that won't, because the 100 level policies are the board's. But anything looking very closely at our student policies is extremely critical, where we have that equity lens, where we use the equity lens. And I think the last sentence, only if that policy and procedure is edited, adopted, communicated, understood, would monitoring be successful. That's something that we have to, I will take responsibility for that. There are oftentimes, and it's in a variety of districts, when there are policy changes or edits, it's not communicated to our principals and our building leaders. Then when there's time, they have to implement those policies through their procedures. And it's not fair to them if we don't inform them. We also agreed on a tool that we would be using to monitor existing policy. That tool's from the Great Lakes Equity Center, Policy Equity Analysis Tool, and there are 4 questions to that. What's the intent behind the policy? And when we review these, what would be the intent behind that policy? Number 2 would be, what are the social constructions, which does the policy embrace? Number 3 would be who benefits from the way things are presently, and then who doesn't. That's probably the most critical question when I've done this policy review in the past. Who benefits, who doesn't? The winners, the losers. And then finally, what actions are going to address those inequities that we do see in our policies? So I think those are those questions that we need to examine with that equity lens with all policy we have. And then I think finally, inviting, encouraging, and amplifying voices of our historically marginalized communities in decision-making. This one, with my interpretation, I think took the most thought. We have to use different methods of communication. I truly believe what I've learned here and in prior communities with marginalized communities, it's more personal. Knowing our executive team members who have connections in the community with underrepresented groups, our principals, key teacher leaders who, they just know people. Hey, Mike, we will talk with this group for you, or this person would like to reach out to. Those are the types of connections that I think, rather than that email or that mailing seem to really, those tend to impact me. But I know it's not about me, but it impacts our underrepresented groups when they are asked by a person of influence, teacher, staff member, administrator at the school level or district level. And I think they also join and they stay with us when we don't just hear, but we act upon it. And I think that's when we get true engagement. And I think they need to know that, we're going to move the needle, so to speak, at the board level, the administrative level, future decisions, based on that voice, based on their views and their experiences. And I think when they become more comfortable with us and speaking with us about that, I think that's when we'll be more successful, because people do share those intensely personal stories. We heard some personal stories tonight in public comment, but I think we will also, when they feel that this is a safe place in our equity steering committee and in our affinity groups, for example, I think that's really going to help us. So I'm sorry to take 10, 12 minutes here. I didn't want to read it word for word with my interpretation, but this point is very critical for me, where I can, like I said, I can take some notes, and then within the next 2 weeks, that would be my goal probably by the 30th, is to get you not on the 13th or not on the 7th when you receive the board packet, but I can we can flush out some of the things you probably like to see, maybe as indicators, evidence, and maybe a target or two if you felt that way as well.
Thank you, Superintendent Johnson. If I'm not wrong, this actually comes back for monitoring at the September 20th meeting, because I believe our next meeting is the first draft of OE3. And I think we've structured it mostly so there's 2 meetings in between a first draft and final, but we still will hold you to the August 30th deadline so that we have that much extra time.
Schedules are good.
So we'll move on, of course, to comments and discussion. I can see Dr. Johnson. I'll have you first in line when I get to your end. Just as a reminder, this is our opportunity to give feedback on things that we might like to see in Superintendent Johnson's interpretations. If there are things that we feel are missing or that maybe Russ, I'm personally gratified to see that you're going to be including more definitions, because I think we learn that even when we think, we talk about something as racism, for example, not every time that we're speaking with someone are we talking about the exact same thing. And so I think having some of those definitions in there are good. It's also a time to discuss, what indicators we might like to see. If there are things that you feel that you will need as a board member in order to adequately say, are you compliant or not compliant with these various things? And I appreciate, Superintendent Johnson, your candor in saying we won't be fully compliant with, certain aspects of it. I appreciate that candor up front. So this is our time for that feedback. So, please go ahead when you're ready. Dr. Johnson, you can kick us off.
Yeah, I think I would just first remind all of us on the school board, if you have not, this is the third and final read that I will actually use this book. I will not look at this book ever again. But if you look at chapter 4 of this particular book again, it's very important. It readdressed some of my concerns, and it was good to see Superintendent Johnson talk about is what I've been struggling as we go through these OE processes is the ambiguity within the interpretation that the superintendent may give us doesn't lend itself to clear and or certain expectations of possible indicators. And if we go back on page 33, I had it highlighted here of the art of governing coherently, the holy grail of Dawson and Quinn. Page 33, interpretation of the board's policy language and all the related identification of indicators is the critical pivot point of a good monitoring report. How will the judgment of compliant or non-compliant be made without the idea of indicators? Not only interpretation, but some form of agreed upon indicators. And those agreed upon, they don't have to be precise, they have to be quote unquote reasonable. Agreed upon reasonable indicators and just reminding there. And so for me, the reason I had this highlighted, what I thought was pretty interesting, they conclude in this particular chapter, after giving the examples, they talk about this two-step process when the board first launching its practice of coherent governance, which we are doing. We recommend a two-step process for monitoring OE policies. That the CEO, school board superintendent, provides interpretation including the choice of indicators that are reasonable to the board to ensure monitoring reports. So that's where we are. But I like the conclusion that said, although this the two-step sequence, because the other step is bringing information back to us from them, may slow the implementation process a bit during the first year. The delay is not really a major factor in the long run, even in the application of the first monitoring cycle. So my continuous concern about time, we have time, especially if we do it right, or work on actually clear interpretations and sufficient indicators that are reasonable that we all can agree upon. And so I encourage you to read the Holy Grail of Cohen and Dawson. And then for me, I have no issues with those interpretations. What I would like to see it in that timeline though, and because where I'm struggling with, I don't know where would the indicators come from. And those follow-ups that you just did though for us though, I could actually see some of those indicators talking about what actions are taking place with the steering committee. But also, you know, some other indicators there. I'm still unsure as I look over the interpretation, but you gave us really an idea, and maybe some of those would be during the first monitoring cycle. Those are reasonably accepted as indicators. And once we receive a monitoring report, we'll probably come to the conclusion that based on what we asked for initially, you're in compliance. But next monitoring cycle though, we would actually need to see more. And so, however though, my point of bringing all of this up that is as we go through this OE process, let's keep in mind that not only the interpretation is important, but also having some idea of what indicators will look like. Because in this book, it talks about what happens when there's not an agreed upon understanding of indicators. And what happens from a board perspective, and then what happens as it relates to unintended or potentially the micromanagement of actually what we put the superintendent in place to do. So, thank you.
Dr. Johnson, thank you for bringing that up. I actually was able to meet with Superintendent Johnson this morning after we welcomed new staff, and that exact topic of, hey, bring up the indicators as well came up. So I'm really glad that you brought that up today. I will note that, you know, while we have it as a two-step process, as we're doing it here as recommended, we can make it a third step. So if next time, you know, Superintendent Johnson, you'll, I'm sure, have those indicators to us in that 2 weeks. But if we come back on the 20th and we don't feel, and the board as a whole does not feel this is, you know, this is an agreed upon, and maybe you're right, maybe we will go with this can be okay for this year, but here's what we want to see next time. But if it isn't, we can always, you know, send the report back and say, hey, we need these extra bits before we can really make it. So as you said, we don't have to feel time pressure. I just wanted to make that clear for everybody that, you know, we have this schedule, but if we need to move it back, it's better to try to do it right. And it should always be a growing. Hopefully we get to a point where we say these are the right indicators for this, but there should be, I think, somewhere in our policies, always an area that's evolving, growing, bringing different indicators or different things. So I'm sorry to go on like that, but thank you so much for bringing that up. And I just want to let you know we should work that in as we get that. So other comments and questions? Commissioner Zerb.
I can just jump right in with the things. I mean, these are just like little weird things, and I'm going to harp forever and ever and eternally on communication because it's just where I feel like where my heart lies in this work. But I think, page 4, let's go back here. I can't remember which one it was here. Yeah, it's the first one there on page 4. Educational tools for the community. So I think this is something that we need to be really intentional and really good at the outset here. We need to be, it's been a tough year for us to kind of stand in front of the good stuff because we've been kind of micromanaging a lot of, you know, I don't know, for better or for worse, crisis, right? Like we're trying to move our district beyond that and staring down, you know, now what will be a referendum. But I think that this is the positive, the good, the forward thinking, the progressive work that this district is doing. I think how we go out as a district, the board and the, you know, the administration and our staff are going out into the community and we're talking about this work that we're doing, I think it's really important that we get it right. And I know that you, that we were going to potentially bring somebody on who's maybe going to help us with more internal messaging or more communication strategy. I would love to see some of that initial ideas for that works in that indication or indicator work, that even, you know, or what are we scripting? What are we, right? Like, what is our plan for going out in the community and talking about this work? Because I think it's going to be really, really important for the support that we will get from the community on it and the feedback that we will get and how we will shape the work going forward. And then the other thing you were talking about on page 5, I think it's the only one. There we go. When we were doing the results policy work, this was when I wish Chris Hambook Boyle was still here, because she was one of the people I talked to about this, because I, as a board member, I was looking for examples in the state, in the country. I was trying to find a district that did this well. And they are hard to come by if they don't exist. Like, it is really, 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 really tough to find districts that nail this. And I think the closest I came in that work to finding the people who could get me in touch with people that I would normally never talk to, people that would never come to these meetings, people that we would never hear from, but who are a huge part of our district, were the BEAs. They had their finger on the pulse of communities that not only is it, they have an actual physical barrier to engaging with us, you know, and I think that that is a really important thing. But that sort of what Commissioner Clements called that sort of grass tops organizing, right? Where we kind of find the pillars of different communities, right? Like, we can't network with the grassroots all the time. It's too many in a district this size, but finding those pillars of representative that stand kind of, you know, as the seed head on the growth of those communities, and then keeping that network really strong. That was kind of the vision that we went into that work with, was who were the people that were going to represent those communities and how could we bring them together and have a meaningful dialogue with them. And I think we did a really great job. I wish we could have kept that momentum going, and hopefully with the communication plan, we can. But those are kind of my two: community outreach and community connections are going to be where I'm probably going to linger a lot, but just my initial thoughts there.
Let's look in the other direction. Does one of you want to claim to have been first, or?
I have one comment.
Sure, I'll go Dr. Beacon, then Harder, then Clements.
Minus to what you had.
Go ahead. This last section that we're looking at, I find this perhaps to be the most difficult, but also has the greatest opportunity for radical change. And a sentence that really stands out to me in this section, these voices join when staff or other people with influence ask for their voice. That feels very much like us, them. There are those on the inside, that's us. There are those on the outside. And so the radical change, I think, is when the marginalized communities become the people with influence. That's the indicator. And so if it's, that's over, all of this overlaps. But if you're talking about, what are the indicators for your staffing? Well, I got, these are the target goals of what our personnel is going to look like. What are the what's the composition of the exec team going to look like? What's the superintendent we talked before, what's the composition of the school board going to look like? So you don't have the in and out. That's where you get people in the positions of influence and leadership. But it's combined, with what you're talking about too, this whole network, but at the center of that are those people who have been marginalized, leading.
Commissioner Harder.
Yeah, just a couple quick things. Really was glad to hear about the indicators, because I had the same thought. Concerns about It's great that's coming. And then, yeah, this is really where I head with this too is, it just in my mind, it's the easiest for me to get, I guess, my arms around a little bit is this question of, again, of community educational tools and just creating that, trying to foster that conversation, particularly what we saw this evening, and coming and really wanting to engage and feeling very passionately. And sometimes, and in some cases, we even saw some equity signs up here about, what was really a mask kind of event. But I think people are afraid of what they don't know. And I hope that it's the reality of what we're doing. We can start to talk in more concrete manner about what it is, that it will become less frightening for people. But it's really important to try to bring folks along on this journey. I feel like we haven't missed. It's really important. Maybe stating the obvious.
Commissioner Clements.
Thank you. This happens to build, I think, on what Commissioner Bika had to say about, us versus them. I think is an oversimplification of what is said there, but I think it had a similar, similar suggestion of, but it's for me and I think for the rest of the board to know that the metrics, the evaluation tools that you bring to us are those that are really important to that outcome. And I don't feel like, given my background, I know what those are. And I look around at all of us, and I think we all bring our own perspectives, and I think we all really are very interested and well learned and learn about this topic. But I'm not sure that even us collectively knows exactly what those are. So I'm hoping when we have these presented to us, that somehow there's some validation behind it. And I know that this, again, first year we're aiming for a target. We don't even know what the target is exactly. We don't even know what factor we're trying to hit the target with. But I think one thing that would help me a great deal in understanding both those things is that kind of feedback and validation from the persons for whom we're trying to help the most. And ultimately, those metrics have to be meaningful to them. And I think I have some ideas. I think we all have some ideas of what those are, but I want to make sure that is also what's important to marginalized voices in our community. I don't know what that validation looks like, unfortunately, but I'm hoping that you can help us with that.
Before I go back to Dr. Bika, Commissioner Lyons, is there anything you'd like to add at this point?
The thing that could have gone better tonight, I think, maybe the WebEx.
All right. You're accelerating our timeline here.
Also, we're not at the debrief. We're not at the debrief. Okay, we're still on equity. All right, never mind.
All right, so I'm gonna go back to Dr. Bika.
I just forgot to.
Oh, okay, great. Then I guess I'll take, one thing I want to reiterate that I appreciate your noting that we're not going to be in compliance ahead of time. Like, we knew that this was going to be the case at some point, and we put OE2 and OE3 at the top of the list of our operating expectations, and we put them at the front end of our monitoring because they're so important to us. There's a couple of things. When we have things that are non-compliant, we look in the holy grail of Dawson and Quinn. When they talk about when things are non-compliant or when the progress is not being made, then one of the most important things to do is for the board to decide and have a commitment of when will we remonitor this. And so I want to stress a couple of things. We know, and I think that you know already, because I've heard the work that you've done going into the Equity Steering Committee, which is going to help develop this thing. I don't want us to lose a sense of urgency that we have to make these changes happen, to get this plan to enact real change, meaningful for our students who need the most support, and the barriers that we've constructed for them dismantled. So I want to both reiterate the urgency that we have, and we know this is a big process. And then I also would, I will personally be looking to see a specific commitment to, we will have this plan finished by this time. And whether that is, we will have the 1 and 5 year plan finished by this time with the 10 and 20 year plan to come at this time, you know, that may be okay. That's more of a matter for the board to discuss about how we want to do that. But I want to know, when can we come back to this? Because when we find this non-compliant, and I suspect we will currently find the published for the community a report on a, you know, we may be non-compliant in that too, because we haven't published that report yet. I want to know, and you mentioned it yourself, when will we publish that report? I want to know, I want the commitment from the district. We will complete this task. And it's, again, it's a first draft. I expect the equity plan to evolve as we see where our successes and unfortunately failures are. But I want that commitment, and I want to just highlight the urgency for real powerful change and as rapidly as possible while being thoughtful. So those are my comments. I do appreciate some of the changes that you have expressed ahead of time, and I look forward to seeing those indicators as well. We'll go back to Commissioner Clements, and we'll see if anybody else has additional comments.
Thank you. So I'm going to assume the soapbox or mantle, or whatever you want to call it, that I often do, and I recognize that a lot of the challenges that we see from the results, especially around equity, are influenced by largely things that are beyond our control. That students come to us, families come to us, and they have hardships in their lives or other things that are going on that make it difficult for them to progress academically as we'd hope. And I know that even if we are on target with fidelity and with all the resources we can muster, it's very likely we will not have the outcomes that we hope, because there are other things that are beyond our control. It's not a cop-out, but just that, that's reality. And we try to do things like making sure students are fed, because we're trying to address a challenge that some students face based upon their life situation. So although it's not noted in OE2, because this is about what we're doing, I don't want that part of this district being embedded in our community being lost. That, how are we addressing these equity concerns in ways that go beyond what we do in the walls of our buildings or on our campuses? And so, several of our district staff spoke to that about reaching out to students, helping them overcome barriers that they have at home, whether it's technology or, and many of the speakers earlier today referenced hardships that people had at home that were influenced by what was going on in the district. So I don't know how that's reflected here, because these are things that we're not measuring. We don't really have good tools to do so. And we have even fewer tools to influence. But perhaps referring to what are we doing to try to work with community partners who are in a better situation to work on some of those other things. Otherwise, I fear that if we view this only within our sphere of control, we'll never get a handle on this, because the people who are experiencing these hardships are falling through the cracks, and they continue to fall through the cracks despite everything that the cities do, counties do, nonprofits do, the school districts do. It's because we're not looking at how we overlap with one another. People are sliding through, they're not getting the help that they might need. And we just kind of look at, what's right in front of us, or what can we really influence directly. So I hope that we can start to think about what's our equity mission, not just, and that was what kind of the nexus of part of my question about grades, is that it's not just about grades, it's not just about what happens in the buildings. It's how do we help set up people for success in their entire life. And so how do we do that with cooperation, collaboration with our partners, and recognition of that? And I think someone who works in government, in the public sector, those are often viewed as nice to have things rather than need to have things to pursue your organization's mission. And so I'd like to kind of see how we can begin to recognize those things and what can we do to put our thumb on the scale in a positive way for the things that are happening outside of our kind of most tightly defined scope of duties.
Thank you. Do we have other comments or feedback for Superintendent Johnson? Recognizing that we will have an early period to send feedback on the early draft and more time at the next meeting to ask questions before potentially adopting or approving the policy. Seeing none, thank you again, Superintendent Johnson, for your work here. We look forward to the next draft and continuing to refine one of our most important operational expectations. At this time, we have left only our board debrief for the night. Dr. Johnson, you were the third member of our agenda setting, so I'll turn it over to you to facilitate.
Yeah, so we will just kind of have each of you share, I think briefly, I guess, something positive and or negative or what we can work on with this as we go through this coherent governance process. I will start, for the first time, I guess this is going to be in the meeting minutes, having actually agreed upon something with coherent government. Superintendent Johnson talked about that indicators plus interpretation. I think, I'm not fully in, I'm willing to test the water to kind of see how this works. So I was really good to see that. So, and I'll pass it over to Phil.
Well, the WebEx, I don't know. That probably could have gone a little bit better. The thing that I guess I really can appreciate a couple things about tonight, and unlike other board meetings in other counties, we had a lot of civility tonight. You did a great job running the meeting, Tim. And I know where I stand on the mask mandate, but these stories tonight will add a lot of empathy for them on the impact of this pandemic on students. And these stories tonight were really worth hearing. That was the good part for me.
I think that the thing that reinforced for me tonight was how much we need to really figure out what we're going to do with community engagement and what our plan is going to be and how we are going to interact with our community in a more two-way type of venue, so that there are multiple opportunities for people to engage on subjects that are important to them and things that are important. This venue is such a one-sided thing, because we're not here to dialogue. We're here to get work done, and it's tough. So I'm looking forward. I did submit a report to President Nordine, and he will look it over and figure out what we're going to do with it. But I do think it's really important for us to sort that out in the way that other districts in this governance model have. So and I think the part that was the public comment section of tonight, I think it reinforced for me again the need to say that the hardest thing that we're doing right now is we're making imperfect decisions. That is the hardest part about every decision we make related to it is imperfect, because it's an imperfect situation. And there is no bullseye, there is no target to hit. It's just stinks. And we have to do the best we possibly can. And that is a hard line to walk. And so we can sit here and it might be, it's the right decision, but it's an imperfect decision. And I think that speaks from our community as well, from our hearts. So I think it was hard for that to be reinforced for me tonight.
Commissioner Beek?
I knew that the equity goal was going to be one of the most challenging. And I find that I feel very uncertain. I don't think I am with any clarity about how that would finally present itself in a report. I am feeling very unsure. And so I'll look forward to just more conversation about it as a model for those that are to come.
Commissioner Hart?
Well, yeah, I mean, the striking thing for me was the turnout and obviously the conversation during public comment. You know, I felt kind of from the beginning, but increasingly so as time has gone on, that my credential here as a board member is really strictly as a parent who's got 4 kids in the district. I've got some skin in the game. So I've got that credential going for me. That's about it. But as a result, I feel very sympathetic when I see parents like this coming up with what are obviously serious concerns in just about every case. I think people stood up there, they had something that I found validity to say and the concern that they had. But you know, these issues right now are so politicized. Various media and other forces. It really makes me wonder what we can do to put the politics aside and remember that we're neighbors and parents and we're guardians and that we share a basic concern, which is the well-being of this district, this district. Would that be our starting point, conversations, so that people feel that they're engaged at some level? And we're never going to have everybody along for the ride, but I feel there's more we can do, and I hope we figure out what's happening.
Well, this was aside from President Nordin's, I think, running of the public comment, this was mostly just a reflection of the people who attended. It was very civil, appreciative that people took the time to both present what they had to say and also to listen to what other people had to say as well. So I think that went well. I am a little bit more optimistic, I think, than Commissioner Bika about how the equity monitoring will go, but I think that there's more questions than answers at this point. And I think it will be a process of figuring out, as I think most important things are. And I think what we've laid out as our objective holds. It's just a matter of we're trying to figure out how exactly do we do it and how do we know we're being successful. So I look forward to kind of muddling through that over the next several years as we hopefully iterate in the positive direction on this issue.
I'll also talk about the public comment. It is a credit to our community. I see some of our community members still here. Thank you for bearing with us to the very late hour of the night. That we had such a successful. One of the challenges that we heard about in governance and that we ourselves thought about is how do we as a board elucidate the way that the board operates for decisions that are operational, that are administrative, versus the policy decisions that we work on. And I attended a online parent governance workshop, and Steve Schroeder, the president of Sun Prairie's board, was there, and he had pictures from meetings as full as ours, where the board there was also struggling through how do we work with a decision that is made at a different level and but still also listen and be able to take that feedback. And I was gratified tonight that I think the board did a great job of being available. We want to hear from people in the community, even when they do not agree with us and they do not agree with us very stringently. That conversation and the way that our community responded was very positive in in terms of listening to one another and presenting in a way that made it easy for us to listen to them. But I think the board did a good job of finding that first time where it's not a decision that we voted on. But it's still important to listen and to make sure that we are using that feedback to help guide the way that we work. But also to be clear with the community that where this decision lies and why it lies there. And I think that we made good steps there. As a person who runs these meetings, it's time management for me that we need to do better. We can't always, know when we're going to have 18 people to speak for. And of course, that's still part of it. But I want to do some reflecting myself about, are there ways that we can moderate? We all love this work and know that it's important, but none of us really want to be here at 11 o'clock at night. Thank you to the staff, especially that are sitting through this here. Thank you for that. So that's my continue to work on, is reflect on when we know that we're going to have some of these bigger issues, how do we moderate so that we can be efficient and effective? Thank you.
All right, that concludes the debriefing.
Thank you. The last thing is the thing that we've been all excited for the last 40 seconds, and that is adjourning the meeting. I would hear a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. Aye. We are adjourned.
This program was brought to you by a cooperation between Newsworks and the Eau Claire Area School Board.